Hi, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about a fun thing that I've liked for a long time and seems like a lot of people didn't know about. Even sometimes people that are scholarly don't seem to have a lot of knowledge on the old copper culture. But my friend Dylan here is really, I would say, actually more expert on the old copper culture than me, which is a very unique experience for me because most of the time when I deal with stuff, I talk about topics even academics sometimes know certain areas, but I know so vast. It's really a wonderful experience to talk to Dylan, someone who is actually better than me in the old copper culture. So I knew I wasn't unfamiliar. I'm definitely familiar in some ways, probably more than most people would be. But you still knew more than me. So before we talk about that, though, they are a hunter-gatherer culture, and before we get into them, I did want to address for the people that have this misconception about what a hunter-gatherer is, or that a hunter-gatherer somehow is only one way, always one way, and that they're just a total misconception. So to me, I always try to say that to me, it's hunter-gatherer fishers, because I feel like people leave out fishing, which has literally at least been around for 80,000 years minimum. And of course, Neanderthals were doing that too, and probably even smoking fish before we did, or maybe at the same time, who knows. But
yeah, I bet that goes way back.
Yeah, so my point is that just like cereals go way back, which is another thing that I sent you an article on that is 780,000 years ago in Israel, they were using and grinding, plants and whatever, using starches. So the conception, though, of the hunter-gatherers is just in error. So go ahead and read the one I sent you for hunter-gatherers, mobility.
Hunter-gatherer mobility patterns influence double morphology. Some groups shift between different structures, operating in small, more patriarchal bands during the summer and joining into larger, more egalitarian groups in the winter. Some clans act individually during some times of the year, and then interact with other clans in the larger tribe at other times as hunter-gatherers.
Right, and that's something that the last thing you read was something I had said, because to me, I feel like even sometimes when people understand or think in clans and then hierarchical structures, they don't really grasp clans are not always like somehow by themselves. The clans can always be, because like some tribes can have several clans, 4, 5, 6, 8, clans, and then those clans interact. Sometimes, here's another thing too, sometimes clans only interact with certain other clans or prefer certain ones and not others. Like sometimes you could have clans about like bird and another one's another type of a bird or some type of an animal. They'll interact, or someone with the sea, a fish and a whale or something different. There's a lot of different variation, even how they interact. But what's to me is just showing that the complexity is socially is sometimes more complex even than people think of. Just the fact of you have a family unit, then you have the clan, then you have the tribe. Sometimes it's even more advanced than that. And often to me, it was. Our opinion, I always think of this way. People like generalizations, so we like simplified things. Yeah. And simplified things are only good in a general way. They're really generally not good in when you actually care to know things. I mean, someone before tried to say, well, the dictionary said, I'm like, yeah. And even if that's 100% correct, that's like one sentence or one little paragraph or what, that literally does not explain something.
Yeah, when you could have like a bunch of literature on the topic that would fill up a whole room.
Exactly.
How complex, like all the social taboos and character relations with other clans.
Exactly. So go ahead and read the next AI overview.
The fission-fusion social structure, commonly practiced by many historical and contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, involves a highly adaptive strategy, allowing groups to balance resources and social needs throughout the year. Key aspects of this behavior include fission, separation, During certain seasons, often when resources are dispersed, the larger group, tribe or regional group, splits into smaller, autonomous, and mobile bands or extended families. These smaller units are more efficient for foraging and hunting in low-density environments. The next one?
Yeah.
Fusion, aggregation. During other seasons, often for specific resource booms, e.g. salmon runs, nut harvests, or for social ritual or marriage purposes, these smaller clans come together to form large, cohesive groups. The tribe. The meta-band, or tribal structure. These groups often operate in a four-level hierarchy: nuclear families, extended families, or bands, clans, and the larger regional group, or tribe. Examples: the Inuit, known for separating into small units in the summer and aggregating for social, ceremony-driven life in the winter. Plains Indians, individuals move in small, autonomous groups for most of the year, gathered for the intensive, highly organized buffalo hunt. And that goes way back.
Right. And so but you're already addressing, I think that I like the one part where it talks about the four types of hierarchy, which is important for what I've said before about the when you look at graves in like the old copper culture, and people say, well, they're all equalitarian, and I'm like, you're only assessing, I feel like, one kind of hierarchy. You're missing that there can be multiple kinds, and that the multiple kinds can be fluid, even, which is what I feel. And I'm not saying that archaeologists, I feel today, so just so people understand, I am pro archaeology, pro real history, 100%, and I support archaeologists and historians. I'm addressing, when we're addressing this, even if it has to do beyond the pseudo stuff, it's generally past archaeologists of the 50s or 20s or 1800s, not people of today. Most people of today, and then this is where I wanted to address about that, is a lot of pseudo archaeologies will point to like old archaeology and go, well, they thought in the 1920s that only men did hunting. Well, there's rarely going to be somebody archaeology today in 2026 that agrees that only men did hunting. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, so just because you get my point, or if sometimes I read an old book and they, well, in this old book, it said the hunter-gatherers were primitive. I'm like, yeah. And the book is written when? Oh, 1940. Okay, well, and now, so I feel like so they try to say like, because the reason I bring this up too is because pseudo-archaeologists like, say, Graham Hancock, he likes to read arcane and stuff, sometimes even from interactions with the native peoples from the 1500s or something. Well, those people we know had racist, sexist, homophobic, all kinds of bigotry, ethnocentrism, and they were pushing their stuff for a king. We don't have that kind of mentality now, empire and whatever. So the fact of that they would think a certain way, I just feel is disingenuous to the current situation.
No, and it is, because that's one of the problems we really see with pseudo-archaeology, especially today. It's a whole lot of cherry picking. And if you look at the content that a lot of them talk about and like show on their YouTube videos or their social media pages like X or wherever, it's usually older literature that's out of date, or it's really old archaeology books before archaeology was even a profession. Back when they were bulldozing mounds with bulldozers and literally blowing up mine ruins to find gold and trinkets inside.
Yeah, right. But and then acting like somehow the people today are like that or have to defend against that. I mean, they are different now. But anyways, so the next thing is what you read is the pseudo-archaeology distorts.
Pseudo-archaeology distorts the understanding of hunter-gatherers by misrepresenting them as inherently simple or primitive, often fuel narratives about lost civilizations or advanced ancient knowledge. But yet we're seeing a lot of that nowadays.
Yeah, it's gotten pretty heinous, really. That I don't know how I asked this one archaeologist that deals with people all the time. I told him, how do you put up with that? Because it really gets to me, when they do that constantly, saying, we'll hunt it. Because I like, even off the top of my head, Jimmy Corsetti, this is of course maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, I don't know exactly, but he goes to Göbekli Tepe, he goes, mainstream archaeology, or maybe he calls it big archaeology, is trying to tell you that hunter-gatherers built this. There's no way. And I just go, to me, all I hear is someone being seriously bigoted. That what, hunter-gatherers can't build stuff with rocks? I mean, literally their whole life is a forming of stone tools. I mean, they're experts at rocks. Anyway, in art.
That's one of the issues about the general public's conception of hunter-gatherers, because a lot of that can be like pinned back in the 60s and 70s. With expeditions in Africa studying hunter-gatherers, and there were essays and articles published and even some conferences examining their way of life, and that's where you get this whole thing like all hunter-gatherers are simple, all hunter-gatherers are isolated, and that's really affected the general public's understanding. And so that's why you get people like Jimmy and all his other buddies like Uncharted X, or like Randall Carlson.
Yes.
Or Graham Hancock especially.
Yes.
We view them as these ignorant, loincloth-wearing primitives who don't really know anything, can barely survive. They're always on the brink of starvation. When all you have to do is read any modern book, modern documentary, just go on Google Images and look up, 19th century, 20th century pictures of the Pacific Northwest.
Yes.
And you can see how complex they are.
Oh, I totally agree. Speaking of complex, I put a thing on the screen. You can go ahead and read it and read the types just so people can get on the same page. At least, if nothing else, they'll understand where I'm coming from, and probably you also, and academics, the thinking that there's a simplicity and only one kind. Oh, I want to address real quick before you read these. There's 4 different types. This does not mean, so people can understand, at least my opinion, I don't know, I didn't ask you. My opinion, these are not like moving towards a certain thing. These are just different strategies, because sometimes groups, like as we talked about it before, go back and forth. They don't even stay fixed in this. So don't think that it's like, the reason I'm saying is some people see hunter-gatherers and then you become, not primitive in our culture. That is like, a bigoted opinion from the past. I don't agree with that in general. And I'm trying to say that also, before you read this, that don't think of it, you leave this video and think, oh, we're saying there's a progression and the hunter-gatherers become less hunter-gatherer or whatever. No, there's some hunter-gatherers that may stay at number 1, highly mobile, and yet will have some sort of a community garden, in the sense where they throw stuff, whether it's planted or not, sometimes just dropping things that they want to eat in some area. Leave. Do not manage it in any fucking way. Let nature work. Come back another time of the year and eat the stuff that grew there. Not still picking it. In other words, what I'm saying is still picking it wild. No management. And I'm just making a comment. So go ahead and read. I don't want people to wrongly think that this is these 4 things or any kind of an order is somehow moving to something. Some people can stay one way for thousands of years and then go back to another way. And it doesn't. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. An archaeological framework categorizes hunter-gatherers into 4 types based on mobility, territoriality, and social structure. Highly mobile, non-territorial, and egalitarian. Mobile, with logistical sites, mobile, territorial, and resource defending, and sedentary, with stored resources and social hierarchy. 4 types of hunter-gatherer societies. Type 1, highly mobile/nomadic. These groups are characterized by extreme mobility, lack of permanent storage or specialized logistical sites, no defined territory, and no formal social hierarchy. Type 2, logistical mobile. These groups move around but use specialized logistical sites to process resources, though they do not heavily defend their territory. Type 3, territorial mobile. These groups are mobile but actively defend their territory for specific high-value resource sites. Type 4, sedentary/complex. These groups are sedentary, dependent on stored resources, have well-defined defended territories, and typically possess some level of institutional social hierarchy to manage labor and food.
Right. And so it's already something different. And then could you read this right here? Case studies for complexity. And by the way, the Midwest, I added this in.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, I'm just telling people. So I'm not trying to. The other stuff came up in AI, and I did it one just because this also is AI information. It's just I did a separate search because it had something for Australia, and that's not what we're talking talking about.
Yeah, we could save that for another day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I definitely want to talk about Australia too, but and Papua New Guinea and all kinds of places, because I have blogs already on all that stuff, and I have knowledge on it, and I do want to address. Like I said, with us, you and me, I want to do like once we do our first two blogs together, then I want to do like one of mythology, then one of archaeology, then one of mythology, and one of archaeology. Really have like a nice balance.
Key case studies of complexity. Researchers often point to Pacific regions as epitomes of this complexity. The Pacific Northwest, key groups: Tlingit, Haida, Kwaka, Wak, Potlatch ceremonies, clan-based hierarchies, advanced fishing technology. California coast, there we have the Chumash, who have specialized maritime technology, a bead money system, and chiefdoms.
Pause for 1 second on that. I knew about. I'm originally from California, and I did research on the Chumash. They have one of the most, to me, beautiful ways of talking about how to be ethical. And they said that the way that you should treat people is the way the sun falls on everything equal. I was like, oh, that's a cool thing.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
That's how you should be. The way the sun falls down. That's how you should treat others ethically, is the same way that the sun falls down equally on everyone.
Okay, moving on to the next one. North Midwest, including the Great Lakes. Groups as old as 9,000 years ago. 9,000-year-old caribou hunting structures, now 120 feet beneath Lake Huron, and long-distance trade. Sitting from Oregon, over 2,500 miles away, nearly 10,000 years ago.
Right, and I want to address that real quick, because a lot of people will say, well, the Hopewell were amazing because they had like 2,000-mile, stuff. Well, the Hopewell are amazing. I'm not, but to start it there when that's like a 2,000 year, I think, or under. I think it's right. It's somewhere around there. And compared to 10,000, like I think we're missing like I don't know thousands of years.
And just to add to that, even a lot of archaeologists, they focus on the Hopewell interaction sphere. It's like this epitome. This is when trade really happens.
Right, exactly.
Are you not going to talk about the archaic of thousands of years? We get hints of this, like the continent-wide trade, limited from what we found, but it was going on.
Right, and that's why I wanted to have that addressed, because I felt like it's important to know that the Midwest didn't start this thousands of mile trade like waiting till the Hopewell mountain cultures came.
No, you just have to look at where the rivers flow. They all convene into Mississippi. It's a natural meeting place for tribes and different groups.
But to get stuff from Oregon, you still would have to take. It would be a serious feat.
Well, yeah, just head out east. Just bring that to Lake Huron.
Yeah, right.
Well, just that one piece, it makes me wonder if that was the only piece they brought out that way, or if it was part of like a larger movement.
I don't think that piece comes from Lake. That particular piece doesn't come from Lake Huron. It's the hunting structures that are in Lake Huron. It is. I had only had so much room, so I didn't put all the info of where it was found, but it's found in the Great Lakes area. I don't remember now where. But
no, that piece is found in the eastern Great Lakes. David and I talked about it a little bit. It's either Erie or Ontario. It's somewhere around that area.
Yeah, it could be. I don't remember. I just wanted to address that the complexity didn't like wait until people had. The reason I wanted to bring up the Hopewell thing is because people try to go, oh yeah, but that's when they had established hierarchy and social stratification. So of course they would have long distance trade. Like long distance trade did not wait for that, because I don't believe personally that 10,000 years ago in the Great Lakes there was a high level of social stratification. I mean, they may have had bands that were, and maybe possibly even big men by that time. I do think eventually sometime maybe 6,000 or whatever, the big men type of, or big women or, clan heads or chieftains or something started, or even if they were religious, shamans. I think shamans were already there, but I'm talking about as a power motivator. So certainly what I'm trying to say is, to make it clear to everyone, is that by 10,000 years ago, this is before even Damien thinks that area has some sort of a legitimate social stratification. So that should help people understand. So what they think of the more simple or primitive hunter-gatherers are not acting primitive.
No, not in the least.
Right. So people just need to let that whole primitive idea because that's just, it's nonsense. It's as nonsense as thinking the aliens came down and built, the mounds.
Oh yeah, we could have a whole episode just on that. Maybe a whole series just on that. There's so much just wacky stuff that's come onto the platform.
Really?
Like just with the aliens.
Yeah, I don't want to go into all that because I want to talk about the real stuff. But yes, I agree. Yeah. Dude, there's like all kinds of stuff you and me can talk about.
Okay, we have one last one here. The Maritime Woodland. A key group is the Wabanaki from North America, and a defining feature for them are complex socioeconomic practices developed as historical and environmental contingencies.
Right on.
Modern anthropology is shifting away from that agrocentric view that social complexity, defined by hierarchies, sedentarism, and inequality, can only arise through agriculture. The concept of complex hunter-fisher-gatherers recognizes that many non-agrarian societies achieved high population densities and political integration by managing wild resources with sophisticated technology, rethinking simplicity versus complexity. Traditional models, such as the 1968 Man the Hunter volume, defined hunter-gatherers as small, mobile, and egalitarian. Current research challenges this simplicity by highlighting several traits of complex foragers. Permanent inequality. Many groups maintained rigid social classes and permanent hierarchies long before European contact or the adoption of farming. Sedentism. Stable, high-yield environments, like coastlines, for example, allowed for permanent settlements and large-scale villages. Resource management. Indigenous groups, such as those in the Pacific Northwest, managed wild resources through clam gardens and aquaculture, blurring the line between foraging and farming. Storage and surplus. The ability to store food, such as smoked salmon, created wealth that could be used for prestige economies and feasting.
Right on, then read the next thing. It says 6 errors and assumptions, myths about hunter-gatherers.
Based on recent archaeological, anthropological, and ethnographic studies, the traditional view of hunter-gatherer societies is filled with misconceptions. Number 1, man the hunter / only men hunted. The long-held belief that men hunted while women exclusively gathered has been debunked. Research reveals that women in foraging societies hunt, and they often target large game. A survey of recent hunter-gatherer societies found that women actively participated in hunting in 79% of them, regardless of their status as mothers.
And pause for 1 second right there. I know several more things. Also, women's, when they say gathering as opposed to hunting, most people think hunting, right? They think bow and arrows and shooting or spears or whatever, killing big or trapping big game.
Yeah.
A lot of times what they list as part of the gathering is catching rats, gophers, small, animals or bugs, even grubs and whatever out of trees, right? And that the women generally are said to do. So in a sense, the thinking of that only men are bringing home protein is wrong. Sometimes the women are bringing home those other kinds of protein too that people are eating that are not the big game. So it's not like bring home the bacon. Women are bringing home smaller pieces of their bacon also, in a sense. I'm saying even if you're listing them only as the gatherers, sometimes what is listed for women under gathering is an accurate or limited understanding that they're gathering sometimes is small bugs, animals, that don't require these larger, tools. They're hitting it with a club or something, or whatever. My point is, it's wrong.
Oh yeah, it's very wrong, because just having a woman or a group of women head out to the forest to bring back a bunch of squirrel meat or something, that would literally be the difference between
correct. Absolutely. Or like I said, bugs and grubs or whatever. So I'm just saying that our thinking that the only way you get protein is either get vegetables from women and protein from men. That's not true at all.
No, not in the slightest.
Because I've watched early in the morning, the men are sleeping and the women get up and go catch rats. I've seen that, or whatever, some sort of a thing, bring them back. And that's the first thing people eat for breakfast. Anyways.
Number 2, strict gender roles and division of labor. The idea of a rigid binary division of labor based on sex is a projection of modern Western patriarchy onto the past. In reality, many foraging societies have fluid roles, with women often foraging in groups and contributing the majority of daily calories.
By the way, some people say sometimes up to 80% of the calories for the tribe.
Right, that's very important because that just shows that women aren't peripheral.
They're not. Right. Sometimes.
And arguably, they're one of the most important people in this group.
Correct.
Furthermore, archaeological evidence, such as burials of women with big game hunting tools, suggests that hunting was often a general neutral activity. That's important.
Right, exactly.
Because for so long we've built up this idea that women are peripheral, that it needs to be men, that it's natural to have men lead. When you can look around the world and you can see societies led by women.
Correct. Or that there is a co-leading. In other words, like I've seen too, where there's, in a sense, almost like how like the Catholics have the mother superior controls the females, and then a father sort of superior, whatever, is controlling, the males. And so they're both, you have leaders of both groups doing things. So sometimes it's dual or group leadership in a sense. So I'm just saying it's something like that there's so many variations of how people organize themselves.
Yeah, like you can have your classic king and queen, or if you're looking more like a church setting, you have your nuns.
Right.
Like there's a religious leader right there.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Number 3, they lived in utter isolation. Before I read it, I just gotta say that there are still so many academics in North America, especially, that view ancient tribes as isolated.
Yeah.
You just have to look at the archaeology, look at the burial data, look at the exotic artifacts and how much they're interacting, and it blows that to smithereens.
Yeah. Well, and the copper, speaking of since we're doing the old copper culture, look at besides, I agree with you, stone tools and religious behavior and burial behavior. And but the copper, something particular to this, is also spread out. In fact, Poverty Point, which is considered one of the super early mound culture stuffs, already has the copper all the way from the Great Lakes. And then the Adena, which is the first mound builders in Ohio, copper. The Hopewell, copper. The Mississippians, copper. The maritime people in Florida are getting shells up to the Great Lakes. These people were not isolated.
No, not in the slightest. Not at all. Okay. It is a myth that foraging groups lived in complete isolation from the rest of the world. Anthropological evidence shows that for thousands of years, hunter-gatherer groups have often traded with neighboring agricultural or pastoralist communities, suggesting they were not completely self-sufficient or isolated.
Which is important too for the old copper culture, I feel, because if someone's able to do all this copper mining, some of it going back 9,500 years ago with the ice core lake core data, if you have doing that, are you spending time doing food? So if you're not able to do food, is somebody else providing food, trading for food? I'm just, we don't want to go into all that right yet, but I'm just saying it just shows that self-sufficiency is a kind of a myth, because if you spend all your time doing one behavior, you literally can't do everything else.
Yeah, and that ties in with the next point here. They lived in abject poverty and constant starvation. The assumption that hunter-gatherer life was nasty, brutish, and short is inaccurate. Studies show that foragers often have more free time, a more diverse diet, and less susceptibility to famine compared to early agricultural societies. Their diet was typically balanced. In many cases, they did not struggle to survive, but lived in relative abundance. And looking at the old copper complex, just having all those wetlands, all the mass-producing trees, and you're right on the shores of the largest fresh body waters on Earth. So
yeah.
So, if having a mindset living back then, that's almost like paradise.
Exactly.
Everywhere.
Exactly. Yeah, and if not, you can trade, and you can get surplus food and trade sometimes for different food. Like someone else may go hunt deer, and they get sick of eating deer, which I always think is so funny, because they think that people are any different now than before. Do you like eating, no matter what you like, all the time, only that? Most people like some variety. I like variety every single week. I'm constantly changing what I eat. I don't like that. I don't have any standard really, but variety. So my point though is people think like, well, if you get fish, you just eat fish forever. Like, do you really like eating fish forever and nothing else? You don't think that so I'm just saying that the thinking that you would desire to stay only with your stuff, especially when we already know they're trading something all the way from 2,000 miles. Do you think that's the only thing they traded, or that trade networks were waiting for a stone tool? No.
It's even more ridiculous when you look at some of the older literature that views things like small game mammals, like rabbits or squirrels, as starvation food.
Yeah.
Like you'll only eat that if you're starving.
Yeah.
Well, what if you're tired of eating deer and you want to eat squirrel because you like how it tastes? You like how your father seasons it or whatever.
I totally agree. Well, just like speaking of seasoning, I know that I think I don't know that I remember the date. So I know a lot of stuff, but I don't always remember every detail. Garlic was used, I think it's 8,000 years ago.
Yeah, seasoning goes way back.
I'm just making a comment that it's certainly it's old.
And I can add to that, in Neolithic Europe, they were using mustard seed to add flavor. And on top of that, you can use berries.
Yes.
You can dehydrate those, powder them up, or whatever.
Which correct. Isn't that what the Native Americans? I can't remember what that food's called, where you mix the meat together with berries and stuff. So, Pelican. Right. Yeah. So my point would be, so we do know it wasn't just beef jerky. It was literally had other things in it, showing that just like us, that flavor did matter.
Yeah.
Anyways. We can go on. I just wanted to address that real quick. Another misconception. I feel there's so many, really.
They were all peacefully egalitarian. And this is a trope. It's pretty much a trend at this point. Number 5, they only ate meat. While some, like the Inuit, relied heavily on meat, many hunter-gatherer diets were not exclusively meat-based. A study of early forager diets showed a significant reliance on wild plants. And in many cases, the gathered plant foods provided a critical major portion of their nutrition. And we see that around the world with hunter-gatherer societies. Whether it's, wild plants, wild grains in the Middle East tens of thousands of years ago.
Yes.
Or so in North America, harvesting nuts from trees in the Appalachians.
Or people don't understand that maybe the reason that people used marijuana first was as a food source, since every part of the plant can be is edible.
Yeah, that's a good possibility. And why they started cultivating that.
Probably rope too, but they do believe. I was just gonna mention that. Well, they do believe it's 10,000 years ago in China. They were probably eating it. They were gathering it for some reason. It wasn't smoking. Just saying. So you go ahead now. The number 6.
Okay, they were all peacefully egalitarian. While many hunter-gatherer societies are highly cooperative, not all were peaceful. Evidence from cross-cultural databases indicates that a significant number of foraging societies have historically engaged in warfare or high levels of conflict.
Right, and this to me is important too, because some of the items for the old copper culture could kind of look like that. I mean, certainly like there's that one North 2 that has a thing of a sword that's copper or whatever, talks about.
That was found in Northwest Ontario, I think around maybe 2010, 2011, by a guy named Harold Alanin. He was walking along the shores of Dog Lake, north of Lake Superior's North Shore, and he found it sticking out of the sand on the beach.
Wow.
And he took a bunch of photographs of it. And the thing, I think it's like 21, almost 22 inches long.
Yeah.
It barely shows any use marks at all.
Well,
there's some little nicks, some little damage to the blade, but that could be from centuries sitting in the ground.
Right.
And freezing saw.
Some things goes back to, like I said before, some of the items could have been for status.
That too.
So the next thing, speaking of about eating meat, so the next picture I want to address, I'll throw it on the stage, and I sent it to you also, is a lot of people will say, oh, well, as soon as, people started understanding you could eat grains, well, they, in a real way, that's when agricultural revolution happened. And I'm like, that's wrong, because in a sense, set of humans to leave Africa is around 100 to 120,000 years ago, but most of them go back or die off, don't produce. Even like some people say, well, people got to China 80,000 years ago from that branch. And I would also say, well, DNA from a female from Israel ends up in Siberia, but it ends up in Neanderthal. Doesn't go anywhere. Those people did not. No one alive today has that as their relative. Our relatives all went back to Africa. But before they went back to Africa, which the picture also shows, before they went back, 80,000 years ago in Iran, where some of them stayed there, by the way, 80,000 to 30,000 were picking wild grains. And then they move over to like Syria area, or area of almost southern Turkey, and maybe a little portion of northwest Iraq. But they 30,000, and all the way to Italy. 32,000 years ago are oats, which do not originate there. And I have above there, it's I and H. I is the male haplogroup, and H is the female, and both of them come from the Middle East, or the greater Middle East, the Cossack Mountains or whatever. So you can see they were the new people coming in. But that's not the only thing that happened. So then, because we share ideas. So then people have said to me before, well, because someone showed me, they have mortars down, which, by the way, the 80,000 Iran, they have some mild things of mortars, so they're already processing in some way the grains to eat. And then down in Africa, they start having like 30,000 or whatever. When the people come down there, they start processing grain in Egypt and stuff. And U6, this red area, that's U6, and then U6A is the pink one. This is showing the female DNA that came in 30,000 years ago, the same time of the movement of the people. What a shocker. But surprise, females brought this. Males is not this technology probably, but once again, it's who was dealing with the grain. If you want to stick to our people that think that only men hunt, well, okay, men didn't bring it down, women did. Women brought down the concept of doing the grains to Africa. And then a different version goes from there up into Israel 23,000 years ago with eDNA. And then that later, our DNA goes and blends with it from Siberia by 22,000, I think. But not then at that right away. But then eDNA again leaves Israel 15,000 years ago and shows up in North Africa, and they make, in a sense, new cultural ideas. We can get off of that. I just wanted to show that once again about large movements. These people are not isolated. Look how they're moving around. Anyways, so go ahead and read what I sent you under. It says wild cereal consumption.
Wild cereal consumption in Iran around 80,000 to 30,000 years ago, then spread out from there, going west to Italy and Syria by at least 30,000 years ago, as well as south to Egypt at least 30,000 years ago. Next, Egypt is believed to have migrated to Israel around 23,000 years ago. Then, Israel is believed to have migrated to North Africa 15,000 years ago.
Right, and then the next, so you can look at it. I sent you, you can blow it up for yourself bigger to look at. Because I know that right, it's on the screen. For us, it's kind of hard to see, but in the message I sent you can blow it up bigger. And so it just shows the mortar and pestle. You see how the Natufian culture, who's a lot of people think invented the mortar and pestle. Well, they got theirs after Africa gave it to them. But like I said, Africa might have got theirs from Iran, or maybe got theirs from North Syria, who got it from Iran and gave it down to Africa. But this is what people don't understand. Just because it would make more sense for Iran to go to Israel doesn't mean that's how the genetics did it. And I try to be more careful and show each jump, because my goal, just like Dylan, is to find the details, not these generalizations, that then you don't know what's happening. I know what's happening because I look at every little detail of what's happening, or try to. that helps understand too how these things are moving around. Because even how they say E did, they show the 20,000 years ago or under, it goes to that one culture, but they don't really show this correct, because they say 14, it goes again. This isn't totally correct. This is still, to me, too general, because they're missing that it went to Israel. They don't show that. And then it left Israel. They don't show that either. And then there's actually even more than that, because it's probably about 6,000 years ago or so. It also comes in again from the Middle East. E kind of comes in, and that it brings some of the Semitic languages. The Semitic languages. It shows branching off of the thing that's more north, but that branch didn't branch until like 5,000 or so, and brought it to the Horn of Africa and brought Semitic languages with it. Anyways, I'm just making a comment that even though this is a good map, I like it, it still is too big pictured and not detailed enough.
No, and that's the thing. We could really put a lot of these cultures under a microscope and get really in depth with detailed.
Oh, totally. And we're not going to do all that right now, because I don't want to. I'm just trying to show you that there's a lot going on. So we're going to get out of that one, because we have plenty of other stuff to address. And his tools. Here's the burial. This is the one in Africa that gave the Natufians the grindstone. But like I said, their idea of that probably came from Iran. And the reason also we know this too is the stuff from Iran, like I said, goes to North Syria, and they also find stuff up there, but they also find that they were using grindstones in Italy, where it showed up with and they were taking and making oats into gruel, or maybe powder for bread or something, who knows, or pita bread or Anyway, so the point I was, and look at the knives. Look how this is like 30,000 years old. Look at the assemblage. And this is not metal, by the way. This is not any kind of copper or anything. This is just stone. The fact that they worked it like this, where it looks like my drawing is of metal blades that are missing handles. They probably had handles, but these are stone.
Yeah, all the wood would have decayed.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean,
for being that old, they were incredibly well made.
Right? I first saw them and I was blown away. This goes back to what I'm saying, when people are like, well, hunter-gatherers couldn't, like, you don't even know what hunter-gatherers have done to have the assessment that you think they're primitive. Look at those stone tools, those knives, man, and the mortar and pestle, 35,000 or 30,000 years old. Get the fuck out of here. Come on. Anyways. So, because the reason I bring that up too about Africa is because also people like to say this next site. I've seen even some of the pseudo-archaeologists like this next site, because they're like, aha, this was the first proto-farming. As if somehow they hadn't already, like I said, 80,000 years done that in Iran. And before that even, that people have been collecting stuff. I mean,
from their perspective, the lost ancient high technology perspective, if they knew about the 80,000-year-old hints at the wild cereal harvesting,
right,
a lot of them would probably think, we got to push back our lost freaking civilization. 80,000 years ago, there's another one.
Oh yeah. See, they're hiding that. Like, oh no. It's a progression of ideas. But see, people don't understand too. The domestication of grain isn't even at the Neolithic Revolution, which is like considered to be 12 to 11,000 years ago. It's actually around 9, maybe almost 8 something. Between that time. So yeah, that's way after Göbekli Tepe and all that.
Oh yeah.
But people understand that beer is 13,000 years ago, made in stone, like little cauldron things. And the first pita they have in 14, almost 15,000 years ago in Jordan. Anyways, but this is the one they try to go like, aha, Othello 2. This shows, that people are doing proto-farming. It's like, it's not even a special thing, really. And I also don't understand, okay, and so you agree, hunter-gatherers are amazing, right? No.
So that's funny. They'll talk about hunter-gatherers. They'll talk about their complexity when it suits them.
Right?
They're just the ignorant, loincloth-wearing primitives.
But you see, you get with the contradiction. How can you, try to say, oh, well, you think that maybe agriculture is older, and then also say, and everybody is primitive. Like, come on now. But
yeah, you're just cherry picking what evidence you want to use for your argument. Someone has to tell them their argument's flawed to begin with.
Yes, it is. Well, because they try to say, that the archaeologists are somehow lying or something. And I always think it's funny because, okay, let's assume that they think this, right? I am not an archaeologist. I'm an anarchist. But here's one thing. I like the truth. I can't remember when it was exactly off the top of my head right now, but it's 1900 and something, like maybe it's 08 or something. I can't remember. But there's an anarchist that invented an anarchist school. And his theory was, you just teach the plain truth. I know this sounds crazy. That's it. And you support children's ability to learn on their own and to understand, but you provide knowledge. So that's why I also think it's funny when they're like, oh, well, you use, like I've had someone tell me before, I use my anarchist perspective. And I go, that should be a good thing. Because the anarchist schooling should be, we teach the plain truth. And what that really means is no dogma, not hiding stuff. I'm not trying to put stuff there that doesn't belong. I just teach the plain truth.
Yeah, you tell people what's known. Keep it plain and simple.
Right?
Like, some people don't understand.
Yeah, it's not a new model, though. It's just called, in general, to me, it isn't even limited to anarchists. It's just telling the fucking truth. Anyways, it should be a universal model, really. Tell the fucking truth.
It should be, but there's so many people that think that's a revolutionary idea.
Yeah, but I just try to say that I am doing an anarchist idea of teaching, because the idea is that we just teach. We don't do, like, that's the reason I bring this up too, is some people say that they're socialists, and some socialists don't like to hear when their people they like have done things wrong. I have heard very few anarchists that do this. Not saying no one does, but most anarchists, if someone has said something horrid, like McCall Balkin, great guy, everything is great, great, wonderful, and then you even thinks women had rights back in the 1800s, and then he's like, yeah, but the Jews need to be eliminated. I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah. You just have to fucking soak that in there.
I'm like, holy, like, well, you understand, the time he was in, women didn't have respect. So he was for women's rights. He was for children's rights. How can you be so fucking blind? My point is, I just teach the plain truth. If that's the truth, fucking teach it. Just like Pardon, which is another anarchist theory who practically invented the word they consider father of anarchism. I like a lot of things he said, but he says that women shouldn't work and all this, and it should be all about men and their labor, groups. And like, what the fuck? Women should have the right to do what they want.
That's gross.
It is.
They can't work even if they want to. Like, you need to stay home. No, thank you.
But you see what I'm saying? So I believe in telling the plain truth. If it's not positive towards someone I like, or even myself, I still teach the plain truth, because that's what we should be doing. Anyways, moving right along, just so people understand that pseudo-archaeology think that somehow I like to protect archaeologists. Hey, when they say things I don't agree with, I challenge them. It's just that most of the time they say shit I agree with. So yeah. So this first picture right here just shows the copper distribution in North America. And we're not going to go in real long about this, but you see it's really the really good copper open and available is really in Lake Superior.
Yeah, that's where it clusters.
Right. So we're going to go ahead and read the stuff and read until get that there is good videos. Don't read that. Just read the stuff before it, all of it.
AI overview. Sediment-hosted copper deposits are significant, stratified, and often high-grade sources of copper. AI overview. Peripheral copper deposits are large tonnage, low to moderate grade ore bodies.
And that's referring to the different colors, so people know. In the picture on the left, the darker is the higher grade, and the other ones, the lighter color, is the lower grade.
Mid-continent rift filled with pure copper. The copper that was mined in the Q&A formed during 1.1 billion years. In the present day, these massive flood basalts are only exposed in the Lake Superior region. Throughout the rest of the country, they are buried in thousands of feet of sediments, but we can still detect them. The mid-continent rift ran from at least Kansas up into Lake Superior and then down into lower Michigan. Though rift-related rocks are only exposed in the Lake Superior region. Lake Superior, which is contained within the Rift Valley, the lake's north shore in Ontario and Minnesota defines the northern arc of the rift. From the lake, the rift northeastern arm trend south to central lower Michigan, and possibly into Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Alabama. The western arm runs from Lake Superior southwest through portions of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska to northeastern Kansas, and possibly into Oklahoma. AI overview. The Lake Superior region, particularly Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula and Isle Royale, holds one of the world's largest deposits of native, nearly 99% pure copper. Indigenous cultures began mining this resource at least 6,500 years ago BCE, creating extensive trade networks. AI overview. Indigenous copper use in North America began around 9,500 to 10,000 years ago, primarily in the Upper Great Lakes region, marking one of the world's oldest metallurgical traditions. Archaic period peoples cold hammered, heated, and annealed native copper, 99% pure, into tools, weapons, and ornaments. While initially utilitarian, usage shifted toward prestige items by 1000 BCE. Key aspects of indigenous copper usage 10,500 years ago. Origins and location centered in the Lake Superior Basin, Isle Royale, Keweenaw Peninsula, where glacial activity exposed rich deposits. The Old Copper Complex, OCC, used raw native copper techniques. Without smelting, they used cold hammering and annealing, heating and cooling to prevent brittleness, creating tools, knives, and fish hooks. Evolution and usage 9,500 to 5,000 BP, archaic. Intensive production of utilitarian items like spear points, awls, axes, and harpoons. 3,000 BP.
Pause 1 second though. Even though they list them as utilitarian, and even if they could have had utilitarian functions, the fact of sometimes them being found in graves could mean that there's still symbolic items beyond just the fact of them being utilitarian.
And not just that, when you look at this topic also, incredibly large items, like to the point where they're almost useless. A lot of those cluster around Lake Superior, and there aren't many graves up there, not that we know of, but surveys have been limited in that region too. So there could be graves, cemeteries up there, they just haven't been found yet. Looking at those complex items, and you connect that with the graves that are happening at the same time these items are getting made, it suggests that there's more to these copper items than purely utilitarian function. There's a social value to these.
I agree.
Accept that too, because if they're a cashless society, which we think they were, all your value is coming from the time spent making those items. So they're not just utilitarian, they're incredibly value laden.
I agree. I just wanted to address that because sometimes when people that they use words, people can then dismiss it as like, oh, they didn't matter. They're just like, no, it does matter. Just like people, let's say you have a hunting knife. You like it so much, you then hand it down, right, to your children or whatever. Or even sometimes someone has a watch. Oh, that's my dad's watch. I'd like, do you think people were that different? Anyway, no.
I'll show you something. It's a clay reproduction of hunting knives. It's based on one of the old copper complexes knife categories called 2C.
Right.
Your typical knife blade, but the main difference is the handle isn't tanked. It's socketed. And, it looks utilitarian. Like you said, like if you pass it down, like each generation you pass it down, it's gaining social significance for your family.
Absolutely.
Like there's almost honor to be had holding this thing. Because it's passed through so many hands.
And I'm right. I'm just trying to say that sometimes how people talk about things, I feel like they miss the social significance of things.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying, like, sometimes I hear some archaeologists or historians talk this way, and it may just be because they're just trying to convey certain things, and it also could be that they see these people as different, which is my degree is in psychology. So, and I'm also an anarchist, and I see everybody the same. So, in the whole world. So I don't have that many limitations. I still have limitations and biases, but I have less of them when it comes to the people behaving 100,000 years ago is not really that different a lot of ways than how we behave now. So but I feel like a lot of times people see people in the past beyond being primitive as just being different. That, well, they couldn't possibly think like me. Yes, they did.
Well, yeah, they valued all the same things we valued. It's just they had a different way of expressing it because they're a different culture.
Exactly.
Right. Humans have been found. They liked painting. They liked decorating their tools. They liked
absolutely
standardized tools.
Absolutely.
That's the old copper complex. They liked food. They liked hunting. That's all stuff we like doing today.
Yes.
It's like they're more similar to us than we previously thought.
Right. And like I said, I would say that probably more current anthropologists, archaeologists, historians are aware of that or think about that. But obviously the general public still is, especially being pushed by the pseudo-archaeology, is the exact opposite, that these people are so different that's why they have to all be primitive. And I'm just saying, even when tools are primitive, that doesn't mean they were limited in some social status or some social, value.
And even the reconstructions for their tools, they're really basic. And I've even seen some art, I think it was made back in maybe the 60s or 70s, a museum display showing the copper miners.
Yeah.
It shows them like practically naked in loincloths mining copper. Like, are you serious?
Well, but here's the thing, though. I agree that's probably a bigoted view. But there's also a bigoted view that because you're naked, you don't have complexity. And that is not true. There are tribes that have complexity. Yeah. Speaking of the Shumash, right? The Shumash, a lot of times we're naked.
Yeah.
And yet they had chieftains.
Like walking around shirtless, walking around with a loincloth. People do that because it's hot.
They're in California. The weather's nice. Why? That's what I'm just trying to say, is that even if it's accurate, obviously not all the time, which I do think is pushing too much of a narrative, because certainly they're not mining all the time, but they're probably, wouldn't disagree, they're probably not doing it during the winter. So they're not showing winter clothes, but I think that I agree with you. If a person looks at the diorama and it shows everyone almost naked and then doing stuff, the thinking would be they're always naked. But of course, that's just illogical, not critical thinking. Do you think in the winter, this is how that they're dressing? I don't think so. They wouldn't have survived.
You're not going to survive one winter up there if you're walking around. If that's what your culture's wearing all the time.
No.
You're going to freeze to death.
Right. Well, let's go back to the so then 3,000 years ago onwards.
3,000 BP onwards. Now we're into the woodland period. A shift occurred where copper was increasingly used for symbolic, decorative, and trade items, such as ear spools and bracelets. Trading and distribution. Copper from the Great Lakes was widely traded, reaching as far as the Ohio Valley and across North America. Environmental evidence. 7 studies show peak mining activities occurred between 9,500 to 8,000 and 7,000 to 5,000 years ago, leaving traces of lead pollution. Decline in large-scale use. Large-scale extraction dated around 5,000 years ago, potentially due to climate shifts. But copper working for specialized items continued until European contact. Key periods of copper use. Old Copper Complex, roughly 9,500 to 3,000 years ago. These archaic period hunter-gatherers exploited the world's largest deposits of 99% pure native copper, found on the Keweenaw Peninsula in Isle Royale. They manufactured durable tools such as spear points, knives, fish hooks, and axes. The woodland period, roughly 3,000 to 1,000 years ago. Copper use shifted significantly from everyday tools to ceremonial objects and status symbols, such as beads, bracelets, and ear spools. This reflected the rise of more complex social hierarchies and religious practices.
So my opinion is that the Algonquin languages come from the Pacific Northwest. Here's something that people don't get to, like I talked to you before. Just because a language shows up and everyone then starts speaking that language doesn't mean that it was like a genetic thing always, that it was the large group of genetic people take over. And sometimes that's, you can have like also where the language mixes some genetics and some original people, but now everyone speaks the language, a new language version. So I'm just saying, but to me, it's about 3,500 to 3,000 that they show up in the Great Lakes. So I find it very interesting. Just like to me, haplogroup C, somewhere time between 8,000 to 6,000 shows up in the Great Lakes. And there's a big shift, 6,000, I think it is, right? Where they start doing a lot more of the tools and everything.
Yeah, when mining on Battle Royale really picks up.
And I wonder, I really wish we could find out DNA who's doing what. That would really be interesting. But I do know that some of the stuff that happens seems to kind of match at least those two big amounts. cDNA showing up, which I know is DNA and New Ideas, who had just left, Asia again. And then you have the people, which this is what I think as far as the Algonquin. Paleo-Inuit come in, which some people call it Paleo-Eskimo, but indigenous people do not like that term, so I don't use it. Because in fact, I had a friend who is indigenous and would not read an article because they called it Paleo-Eskimos. And I won't even read it.
Yeah, I'm used to using the term Eskimo, but since I've started researching more indigenous communities, I'm trying to switch that over. It's still a habit. To give you an example, I made a post on the Old Copper Complex Facebook group talking about this, what looks like a toggling head for a harpoon.
Right.
But it looks like something you find in the Arctic, and it was found at the Ray Cemetery. And for the post's title, I put Eskimo.
Yeah.
And one of the top comments, not even addressing the content for that post, one of the top comments was just saying, Eskimo is derogatory. Like completely brushing past what the post was about, just nitpick at that. I mean, I get where they're coming from, so I'm trying to switch my language.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why in my videos, especially being an anarchist, I try to be sensitive to other people's needs, because a lot of language that we are comfortable using is bigoted. So I try to it's upon me to be thoughtful. I don't want to be a bigot. Not even by accident. Of course, don't know everything and will sometimes but I try to be, it is upon me to be a better person. I don't want to be like everyone that came before and is ethnocentric and bigoted. And I want to try to be, so I understand it's hard to do the research stuff because I can't help the fact that other people are using this, but I can, as we're doing now, address it publicly so that others are informed. But anyways, going back to that, the Paleo-Inuit, right, and the small Arctic tool tradition comes in between 5,500 and 5,000 years ago. And those tools show up in the Pacific Northwest. Now, those people kind of go more towards Greenland and, the Arctic and become the Dorset and whatever. Anyways, but my point is, but those tools show up in the Tlingit area. The Tlingit have DNA that goes back 10,000 years, but the language of the Tlingit is 5,000. 5,000 is about the time that the small tool tradition, new tools the Tlingit start using that relate to the Arctic, show up in that area. The other people are using Paleo-Indian tools from, or those versions. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they're using very, thousands of years different tools. Then those people or that influence goes down to California. Central California starts having massive violence and wars 5,000 years ago. Then as people that become the Aztec or the Aztec language, it leaves Central California, goes to, in a sense, Southern California, and then Arizona and Mexico eventually at 5,000. And at 5,000 is the time people in Southern California go all the way to Peru. And these coastal communities are building shell mounds. 5,000 years ago is the time that the entire Puget Sound gets inundated by shell mounds. Before that, it's really more north. And then California, San Francisco Bay Area, 5,000 years ago, gets all these shell mounds, cultural. And
one thing I can add to that before we move on, what's interesting about the shell usage is it's almost always associated with red ochre burials.
Yes.
If you look around, either in the areas adjacent to the shell mound or within the mound itself, often.
Oh yes, I agree.
Find a red ochre burial.
I agree. Yeah, there's more going on than just shells.
They're all over California. They're up and down the East Coast. They're all around Kentucky, Tennessee, northern Alabama. And when I first started looking at those, I was looking at your articles talking about the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
And how there's a bunch of shell mounds up there because they were doing clam gardens and aquaculture.
Correct.
And I theorized, based on the available evidence and the trade networks that were around back then, that there would be red oak burials up there.
Oh, yeah.
And recently they've been finding them. The shell mounds have been eroded, and from that erosion, people have been finding tools. And indigenous communities have been reaching out to archaeologists to excavate to see what's going on there. And they're finding flux burials with red ochre. So it shows that if you find a shell mound, there's probably a good chance, at least in North America during the Archaic, that it probably has something to do with red ochre.
I agree. And even in, I think it's, I can't remember exactly, but somewhere in either Central California or Southern North America, Mexico, they have, I think it's a 7,000 or something year old burial of a woman in a shell mound, and it has red ochre, I believe. So, yeah. And that has to do with a tradition, because the one it's like 9,000 to 8,000 up in the Tlingit area, the shell mounds. The shell mounds I know come from Kew first and come down sometime 9,000 or so, which is interesting because I think it's possible that relates to the Q DNA integration, or coming into America with Q DNA. The X female from the Middle East. Because they're making shell mounds in the Middle East at 11 and 10,000 years ago, and then that DNA leaves 10,000 years ago, gets to China at almost 9,000, and Siberia at almost 9,000, gets to the Americas almost immediately, almost 9,000, goes down, becomes Kennewick Man, goes over to the Great Lakes, and then goes over to Canada, and it buries a kid with red ochre in a first oldest dolmen in Labrador, with red ochre.
Yeah, and I think it's funny you bring that up, because over the past 2 days, I've been debating with this guy named Jeffrey C. He runs a Facebook group called Adina Corner, and his main, one of his main topics of interest is the Algonquin migration and haplogroup X, specifically where traced through time in North America.
Right.
And he doesn't show it in Canadian Maritimes. There's a 2017 article that sampled the cemetery at Port Oshaw, and they found haplogroup X2A in multiple burials.
Yes.
And I was trying to explain this to him. Hey, Jeffrey, we have X2A in the Canadian Maritimes.
Yep.
4,000 years ago. And he's like, no, it's not up there.
Yeah, it is it's up there 7,700 years ago, because that child's burial is, the male side is Q and the female side is X. So wrong.
I tried explaining this to him over and over again, and he tells me, no, I finally had a chance to review the article, and it's not talking about what you think it's talking about. It's talking about the Emu, this historic group from Quebec and Labrador.
Right.
I keep trying to explain to him, Jeffrey, look at the data tables. It's laid out right there. Multiple samples from Port Oshaw showing haplogroup X2A1 and other variants. And no.
Yeah, but I try to tell people the truth. I don't demand that they change. So I don't get into, some people like to get angry. I just am done talking to you. Here's the truth. You can accept it if you like. I'm not changing, and then I'm done. I don't, because it's not for me to force someone. People can believe what they want. I will constantly tell them that's not true. I mean, but it's not for me to force someone to believe something.
Yeah, I'm not gonna keep pushing the conversation with him if he's just not gonna even look at the data.
Oh, I won't. If someone refuses to look at the data, I will talk to them and try to reason why that's not true. But if someone refuses, then my time is better spent, like we're doing now, talking to someone who can further the arguments of ideas in a real way than someone who doesn't want to do that. It's a waste of my time. My time is way better spent with other people, because I know sometimes it can feel like we have some obligation or even an ego to beat their mistruth or error. I don't.
That's what concerned me about this little exchange I've been having with Jeffrey. He spent a lot of time developing his model of how the Algonquins might have come into the Midwest but he leaves out that 2017 genetic study showing that X2A was up here between like 6,000 and 4,000 years ago, if not earlier.
Not only that, like I said, to me, it doesn't I don't believe that X, if it did, it came 3,000, but I don't believe so. I don't think X came from Seattle over. I think that it split up in Canada, and one of the versions goes to the Pacific Northwest and has nothing to do with the other ones. The other version, like a Y, splits, over to the Great Lakes, and then from the Great Lakes goes to Canada.
Yeah, I even tried explaining that to him too. Like, you can have this X group during the Archaic, but like he's been researching, you can have a later group that's also carrying X and up into Maine, like you see with the Micmacs. It's still
true.
Still adamant that there's no X with the Maritime Archaic, that it's only being brought in with the Inuit and the Micmacs. The evidence doesn't support that at all.
And as far as I know, Maine is an idea now, and the cultural groups wouldn't have cared of Canada and the United States, and the difference between Maine and...
They didn't have those concepts in their head back then.
They wouldn't have known the difference between Maine and not Maine.
If you look at it on a satellite, it looks pretty flat, but once you actually get here, like on foot, it's hills.
Yeah.
Hills and glacial valleys and lakes and swamps.
But I'm just right. I'm just saying, we go back to the thing. I'm just saying that I agree with you. The opinion that only came, or does have to come one time. That's also what I was trying to say about the language. Just because the language goes doesn't mean it always has to be in DNA, and it doesn't always mean when a language develops in an area that somehow they took over or something. Sometimes ideas spread for other different reasons. It's not, in fact, sometimes like the Greek Mycenaeans, the Proto-Greeks or whatever, they adopt most of the culture from the Minoans, and yet they kind of took them over. So I mean, this thinking that the conquerors, it could be that you're not a conqueror, but people, for whatever social value, like that language or its use, or it could have been that's when they brought the hierarchy ideas. That they were not themselves the hierarchy, but they brought this new thinking and this new religious structure that you're like, hey, I like that, because it just thinks
like you were saying with the Algonquins.
Yes.
To the copper mine around 6,000, 4,000 years ago. You have that cDNA.
Yeah, cDNA, which is male. So I think that Q and X come before that. So I think these first people, to me, or not, the first one, 95, those are Q and maybe A, B, C, and D female. And X gets there probably after 9, maybe by 8. I don't know, but certainly very close to 8 something probably. But so it gets there, and because I know it already gets to Canada by 7,700 and buries that child, or is involved in that burial child. So it's almost 8,000, but under that it gets to Canada, Labrador, the coast. So it certainly is before that it's already in.
Yeah, it's already up there.
It's already in the Great Lakes before that. So then, like I said, then cDNA, I don't know it now, just like you'd know. It's not that the male DNA or female DNA come in by themselves generally. People move in migrations together. So I don't know who they brought down. It would help if they were able to show a lot of this DNA and differentiation, because sometimes so A, B, C, and D before X already is in the Pacific Northwest. But then all of a sudden, clan-wise, we know A becomes a big deal in the Tlingit and in the Haida and in the, I can't remember which other ones off the top of my head, but several different clans, all of a sudden, A becomes a big deal. Even though it wasn't the first one in, it may actually have been, I don't know, because I would need to know the DNA and when specific DNA. But A's are A, going back to what you were saying. So a version of a female haplogroup was already there. It's possible that when the ideas come with the small tool tradition from the Arctic come in at 5,000, maybe it was females coming down, the males, maybe the Q DNA stayed north, maybe somehow the female was the interaction, which would kind of make sense because Tlingit is matriarchal or matrilineal. And some of those other ones that same up in that area are also that way. Their clan structures are highly towards females, not males like people think about when they think of who's the chief in a sense. But that doesn't mean they don't have a chief, even if it's a male. But anyways, because it's more complex, it's not fucking simple. But anyway, so my point is that maybe that is what happened. Maybe it was a new version of A from Asia or even from Alaska that when the QDNA came into North Alaska or Western Alaska, maybe they brought or inspired the movement of A with new ideas to come down, and then they bring this new tool technology. Like I said, I'd love to figure out all these details. Actually, I know they show up. My point is that they were already there, and all of a sudden they become a dominant thing. I don't know exactly, but the same thing could happen. You can have more versions of Q. There's like I think personally, Q comes in at 24, 25. Q comes in at 16. Q comes in at 14. All different. Q comes in at 10. Q comes in at 7. Q comes in at 5,500. Q comes in again at like 2,000. So multiple times Q comes from Asia. Also, Q goes back also 5,000 from Americas back into Siberia or whatever. But my point is, so when you look at the DNA, you're like, oh well, Q. Yeah, okay, that explains everything. No, it does not, because there's multiple lineages of this going on.
If you just call it Q, that really flattens it.
Yeah, it flattens it. It makes it general easy, but that doesn't explain a lot. Right. And so it's hard to see all these migration. And that same thing I was saying, very few people studies. They just do like A, not which A. Because is this new A that took over, is that the old A that just somehow gained power? Or is this the new A that just came in and with new ideas and inspires this new power structure? I think B, go ahead.
Since we're talking about the issue with the generalizing DNA, we can really see that with all the pseudoscience with haplogroup X.
Oh yeah,
like that classic map with like the white continents and the hot spots and different shades of orange.
Yeah,
all the people talking about that. I mean, even before I was familiar with genetics, when I first saw that, I'm like, oh. But once you start doing your own research and figuring out, oh, this isn't just one group of DNA called X.
Exactly.
And the one in North America is unique. It's not related to the ones in Western Europe.
Correct.
It's a later lineage.
An earlier lineage.
Younger one.
Well, yeah. So it's an earlier one went to the or branch, because see, they split. Like it's A and B in a sense, or whatever. So it goes over to the Americas is an earlier branch, an older break or whatever, and then a younger one goes to. They both sort of move at the same time, and they both end up with shell mounds, which is interesting, and both end up with dolmens, related and buried in dolmens, which I also think is very interesting. I think there's a connection, but that doesn't mean they're the same age, which I said is another complex thing that somehow they must have separated. But that's like, you can have a grandmother that doesn't move, and then all of a sudden there's a drought or, catastrophe, and now even everyone has to move or whatever, you know what I'm saying? So, and there is climate stuff and other situations of why these people might have moved at this time. But anyways, I don't want to go all that, but yes, because I could talk about all kinds of stuff about that. But I want to go back to the thing. But I did want to address that this thinking, the practices. I think that to me, when 3000 is about the time when the Algonquin language shows up, and they would have had the new ideas of the Great Spirit. They would have had the Great Spirit, because before that, I don't think they did in that area. I think the Great Spirit to me is 5,000 years and under. And so to me, 5,000, that's what Tlingit did. Tlingit has a Great Spirit. The other 2 or 3 things up there have the Great Spirit or a version of it. They call it Sky Chief, but same similar type of thinking. But because of course, once again, just like I think there's 3 versions of it, of the Great Spirit. The one that's the Great Mystery, non-gendered. One is could be either male or female gendered, and one is only male. And the one that's male sounds more like a god. Anyway.
We're used to thinking about God that way, as just being a male.
But I'm saying is, but it does track that it is a sky god. Only one version, though, of the three is more distinctly. One's like almost like pantheism, but is a gender. The other one is mystery and not even given a gender. So that's what they call it, the creator. Anyway, my point is, though, is even that's more complex than what people think. Like I've said several times, though, is that all of this stuff is really more complex than most of the time people think or understand. So the fact that the copper shift, I think that could be a cultural shift because of the language coming in with new cultural and hierarchy complex ideas and different religious practices. So
that makes sense too. Like if like when these copper using people, like say 7,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, before they really started mining on Isle Royale intensively, it's like hearing stories being passed along the existing trade networks of new incoming people, and with new incoming people, that's more mouths to feed, and there's going to be more demand for certain items, especially copper, if they're interested in that. And so if you have all these new people coming into the Great Lakes region, I think that would help explain why we see this big uptick in copper usage, because there's more demand.
Yeah, and also the ones from that area, if it's cDNA related, you're talking about 6,000 to 8,000, that those people also have already different strategies and thinking, because in other words, like the people that were first come are doing more big game hunting, but by 6,000 that's not really a reality. So the stone tools are different, the thinking is different, things. It's a cultural package to me that's different, and it's not so different though compared to the later ones. By the time you get down to 5,000, those people are stratified, and those people are more full-on pagans in a sense. What I mean by that is God believers than the people before them or the people before them. Because I think that I don't think that Siberia had, to me, God beliefs until after 10,000. After XDNA brings the proto-paganism, early paganism ideas up there, then it starts, but they're not as fixed as the later ones. By the time 5,000, the people from Proto-Indo-European who have all kinds of gods and are pagans, they go and hit Siberia 5,000 years ago, 5,500. They're bringing in full-on paganism. So, and then paganism shoots into the Americas, and that's when the Great Spirit and stuff starts moving around. I'm just saying, so the cultural of why you do things, or what all of a sudden significance changes. So I can see them caring a lot more about the copper in its religious connotation, because a lot of times it's a cultural, like cultural beads or bracelets. Yeah, and a lot of people wear beads and bracelets before for religious reasons. And I do know that 5,000 years ago is the labyrinths come into the Pacific Northwest, and people, I know eventually they become a lot associated with males, but a lot of that was really associated at first to me with the females, or it was both, not, because our culture I know is more patriarchal, so we think everything is the man, but that's not accurate.
No, I've seen multiple guys in person with giant caged ears,
right?
Earlobes hanging down to here, and so it's not strictly for women. That's expected with some guys, maybe like half the guys, if not more, for some societies.
They weren't just limited to men, is what I was trying to say. They're status items, but they weren't limited to men, is what I'm saying. No. But definitely there's ones that come in at 5,000 and then distribute. And so I know that, I don't know how old the ones labyrinths are in the Great Lakes, but I would be not surprised if you tell me they're 3,000 and under, when the ideas that came from the Pacific Northwest finally get there. Because also it would be interesting to me if, just like what happened with cDNA, what if, like you said, the tool that looks like the Arctic, what if the Arctic did the same thing as C or X and did a split and went down first there already, maybe 5,000 or whatever, and then come again at 3,000, because that kind of stuff is possible.
Well, for the Arctic, it's not entirely in the Arctic, not in the far north, but like northern Ontario, right near the Arctic, northern boreal forest border.
Yeah.
Right on the edge of Hudson Bay. They found a burial up there that was disturbed during construction, but the burial had red ochre associated with it, and likely, from what I've researched, it likely contained a gouge, like the stone gouges that I've shown you.
Right.
What's interesting about that burial is it's very old. I think between 8,000 and 7,000 BCE.
I wish they would then DNA they knew, because that would really help me understand because that's how you're able to figure out more detail. Is the DNA to me doesn't just show migration, it also shows like who's important and or how they're behaving in their communities. Anyways, so then by the Mississippi period, go ahead and read that.
Mississippi period, 1,500 years ago, elaborate copper plates and ornaments became central to the southeastern ceremonial complex. Mined Great Lakes copper was traded to vast networks reaching as far as Florida, Oklahoma, and the Gulf Coast.
Which I think is interesting that it goes all the way to Florida or the Gulf Coast, because you're like, wait a minute, Great Lakes went to Florida? I guess they weren't disconnected.
No, and it's interesting because if you wind the clock back to this period when they were mining copper at Isle Royale during the Archaic, like all the way up to the end of the Archaic, the majority of the copper, like 98 to 99% of it, is all clustered in and around Wisconsin. It's only after that time period that it really gets sent farther and farther away.
And I had a question too about that, because I don't know. Do you know if they were still mining it in small amounts, or were they? I'm talking about for trade, or do you think they were taking old items and reworking them, or giving them, and then people were reworking them?
It's probably all of those. Right now, the main lake sediments that David Pompiani has tested are just for Isle Royale and the central and eastern part of the Huron Peninsula. There is a whole bunch of mining pits in the western Huron Peninsula that haven't been tested at all. So we don't know how old those are.
Right. Because I was going to ask too, because I know that they still, I've heard that they still were making awls, and they still could have been making fish hooks or other smaller items. And do you think that was new copper, or just reworking of old copper?
Well, yeah, I get what you're saying. I think they were recycling some of their items, especially later on once we see farming up there. You know, people are going to be digging in the ground and pulling stuff up, just like we do today.
But when does farming get up there? Is it 2000?
It's around 2000, 1500, like more towards the Mississippi period when we really see intensive corn and maize agriculture get up there.
Okay.
But before that, like during the Archaic, the early woodland, there are mining pits, like I said, western Huron. Those have been tested. No idea how old those are. Along the Wisconsin-Minnesota border, the same thing. People have been reporting pits there. We don't have any clue how old those are or how intensive their workings were. Northern Lake Superior Shore, same thing. Mining hammers, mining pits. No lakes have been tested. No clue how old they are. You head out to the islands in eastern Lake Superior, such as Michigan, exact same thing.
I have a question too. That what I felt when they talked about just the mining cores and everything stopping, but yet the copper seeming to flow. And then an almost more extensive thing, not less. I was wondering, could it be that they found pure copper and didn't try to do anything near the lake, and yet sent pure copper down, and then people worked it as nuggets or things, and so it wouldn't show up as you know, like the lead in the lake, because you're no longer trying to make the item there, you're just sending raw ore. Could that be possible?
Yeah, that's possible, because to give an example, like look at Europe with their different furnace technologies. Like if you really start out, like you're just starting mining, it's probably going to be pretty dirty.
Right.
But once you get the hang of it, once you refine the technology through trial and error, you know, and loss of life, it's possible that the reason we see that diminish in pollution is because they found a way to minimize pollution. Like maybe they were using something to limit the smoke produced. Maybe they were manufacturing their items further away from lakes or in a different way that produces minimal pollution. But besides the actual mining, extracting the copper from the basalt, the glaciers, when they passed over that area, they ripped up a lot of the copper and dropped it as nuggets and multi-ton boulders across eastern Wisconsin. And so even if David Pompiani's hypothesis is right, that the reason they stopped mining was because of diminishing returns, you still have all those small and giant copper nuggets and boulders, hundreds, tens of thousands of them all across eastern Wisconsin. And so, like Larry Furrow and Joe Neubauer have shown, even a tiny nugget like this, you can make a giant spearhead or a knife out of that. You're doing
right. And if you didn't have to use fire to crack rock and to extract it, it wouldn't show up.
Yeah, if you're not doing something that's pumping out smoke to fill the atmosphere, that's going to eventually trickle down into closed lakes.
That's what I'm saying. Exactly. Yeah.
Dealing on smaller scales or larger scales, but you found a new process that's maybe quicker, more efficient, and produces less smoke. You're not going to see that giant pollution mark.
Well, that's what I was wondering. That just because we don't see that, does that really mean that there's a limited of the resources being drawn? Like I said too, what if they're taking it in the most crude form and then letting other people, later down the line, work it into something, and thus it would be a lot more distributed further away and distributed in general to not have a concentration. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, not only that, like I said, we have all those untested mining pits. So there's a chance that mining didn't end abruptly in the Middle Archaic, but it continued throughout the Late Archaic, like a lot of academics used to think, and many still think, because we have all these untested mining pits across Lake Superior and even in Minnesota.
Well, that's good to know.
But for copper use, there's other copper that was used in Eastern North America besides that from Lake Superior. Like you mentioned earlier, there's copper at Poverty Point at the end of the Late Archaic. Some of that copper has been tested, and some of it traces to the southern Appalachians, and another amount traces to the Canadian Maritimes. So as time goes forward, people recognize the value of copper, especially that it's valuable. People are surveying. I'm thinking they're surveying different regions to find more of this stuff. And even into the Hopewell era, we see the same thing. I think there was a recent study done for Mound City, one of the earlier Hopewell Adena sites, and it shows a similar thing to Poverty Point. They're getting copper not just from Lake Superior, they're also getting it from the southern Appalachians.
Yeah, I think it's important. So, and it would be interesting too if some of that understanding moved with people. In other words, like I'm saying, the people are so. What if some of the miners? I do know languages did move and people did move. What if some of the people that knew how to do that moved south and, like you said, it's surveying, looking,
I actually think this is interesting because when you look at it in GIS, it becomes pretty obvious that people are moving around and looking for new places to live and new resources to utilize. Because, like I said, with the old copper complex, the bulk of their items clustered in Wisconsin, especially eastern Wisconsin. But if you look out east towards the eastern Great Lakes and even into the Canadian Maritimes, people have been finding a diagnostic, classic, and not just for practical uses, for spiritual uses, other things like that. They're taking that knowledge, bringing it to different distant groups, and searching around, either searching themselves or training future generations. This is what copper looks like, this is how it feels, this is how it sounds when the item is ready to use. This is what it tastes like, because like Ryan Peterson has said, it's not just, you have your copper spearhead, it looks cool. It's a sensory experience when you're working the metal, when you're searching and prospecting for it.
I agree. And often sound, going back to religion and sound, sometimes that itself can be believed to be a religious thing. And I know that some of the people feel that it's not you make the art, it's that it was already there and you bring it out of the rock or out of the metal. So the the process of making the item can have a religious connotation. In other words, like I know that in the Norse they had warrior shamans. So it's not, because I think that we also, once again, everything is simplified. We think of, the religious person is the one that's not really leading people or is just being a religious leader. Pharaohs were a religious leader that also were the king in a sense, and then right, and then and I'm saying too, it could also take up. We think, didn't the Pharaoh go to war? So he's also the war leader. So he's the war leader. He's the spiritual head and the king. So I'm saying the same thing. I think it's not ridiculous with thinking of these other stuff is that our stuff is too simple, really. The thing that we need to get from today's lesson is that our thinking is too primitive and simple and not complex enough. The people were.
Yeah, because if you're just starting out researching hunter-gatherers, or if you're doing what I do and try to specialize in northern hunter-gatherers, if you head into it with an attitude that they're simple, no matter what they're doing, what they're making, they're simple. And if you look at what a lot of the young people are doing with the lost age and high technology,
right,
looking at hunter-gatherers as loincloth-wearing primitives that are too ignorant to know how to feed themselves. If you head into it with that mindset, all you're going to see is simple stuff. You need to take that mindset, crunch it up, throw it away.
I agree.
That's what a lot of academics are doing, because they're realizing just how flawed their interpretations. Academics have written about it. Kenneth Sassman has written a lot about this issue. Nathaniel Folsom, he's talked about it a little bit in his videos about hunter-gatherers. With hunter-gatherers, the thing that you really need to get a grasp on is their subsistence. That is the main difference that separates the classic forager society we're all used to thinking and talking about with the hunter-gatherer.
Right.
They can do the same things. You can have monumentality. You can have social hierarchy where you have to prove yourself.
Right.
In order to climb the ranks, or you're inherited because your family has secret knowledge, or you're great warriors or something like that. Once you recognize that it's just a subsistence strategy, they become so much easier to comprehend. At least for me, from my experience.
Well, I think that's wise. I appreciate you saying that. Let's move on to technological innovations.
Okay.
Cold hammering, talking about how it done and the mining and
cold hammering and annealing. Unlike old world cultures that smelted ore, indigenous Americans worked with raw nuggets. They used stone hammers to shape the metal in a process called annealing. Repeated heating and cooling to prevent the copper from becoming too brittle to work. Industrial mining. Archaeological evidence at Isle Royale reveals over 1,000 ancient pits, some reaching depths of 20 feet. Miners used fire setting, heating bedrock with fire and then dousing it with water to shatter rock and release the copper veins. Trade and significance. Copper was a metal of power, valued for its brilliant color durability. It was traded for exotic materials like marine shells from the Gulf and mica from the Appalachians.
right, which also should, go ahead.
Throughout the Archaic, I think that they weren't trading shells, because you have to remember that shells are a perishable material, especially if you leave them in acidic soils. But based on the number of shells that have been found just in Wisconsin alone, like entire necklaces, some people were importing shells just to throw them away in a burial. So at least for me, I think that shells were a regular, maybe a rarer, but they were being traded around, I think, throughout the entire Archaic.
That just still shows far-reaching trade, which I think it's also people that are doing that are wanting a high-status symbology, or religious-related item. So go ahead and read this next picture. This is so people can understand the time frames we're talking about. And I put these together. Normally, it's a lot of times people start with lithic stage, but I wanted to address the Paleo-Indian and pre-Paleo-Indian.
Periods in North American prehistory. Pre-Paleo-Indian / pre-Clovis, before 13,000 BCE. Early Paleo-Indian / Clovis era, 11,500 to 8,900 BCE. Late Paleo-Indian / post-Clovis, 8,900 to 6,000 BCE. The Lithic stage, before 8,000 BCE. Archaic period, 8,000 to 1,000 BCE. And that's the era that I'm specializing in right now. The formative stage, 1,000 BCE to CE 500. Woodland period, 1000 BCE to CE 1000. Classic stage, CE 500 to 1200, post-classic stage, after CE 1200.
Right on.
That post-classic stage, that's around the time when the Mississippians really start having trouble, and a lot of their sites are getting abandoned.
Yep. And so this next picture, we're going to go really quick down some of these pictures. This next picture is just showing my thoughts on different Q DNA migrations. I list the number of which Q it was to show not one of these is the same Q. I mean, they're all related, but not one of these is the same Q. And then the colors are my thoughts on what they were bringing into the Americas. So I show the early shamanism, and then earth diver with no paganism, and then earth diver with sky gods, goddesses, and earth diver with the sky gods and goddesses. But there was that's not the only myth. That's just one of the ones I focused on. But they're bringing in more stuff also. So then the next picture just shows the several different, in a sense, migrations, also broken down into showing it like before and what happened as they came down. I try to show that there's not just one time that people came through.
So it's multiple migrations.
Multiple migrations, because they used to think just one people came in, boom, everything happened. That's not what happened. Then this right here, next picture shows the mammoth, and it shows the two pictures on the left. One is showing how they came in for the coastal route, probably, and came in through the land route. And we're going to have the next video on the coastal route stuff and the gouges and all that stuff. And then the picture below it shows how they leapfrogged sort of all the way down to South America the first time, and the second time they came in more towards the top and moved, how the migrations happened. Then the next picture shows on the right hand side the different sizes of mammoths, and then the distribution below it. The red shows it's Siberia all the way to North America, and then the picture below that is showing the Columbia mammoth in blue into Mexico and Florida and California, and then the horns or tusks next to it has to do with 15,000-year-old mammoth tusks found in Mexico. On the left-hand side, the farthest picture to the left, the stone tools, the top ones are pre-Clovis, so you get an idea, and the bottom ones are the Clovis, just showing their difference. You can see how they advance. And then all these sites right here are, in a sense, lithic sites before 10,000 years ago, and we see there's quite a few. And then the next one is just showing migrations coming in of Q, and I break it down and say stuff. We're not going to read all that. Here's showing another one, Q. This right here is important for the Graham Hancock people, because this is the one that Graham Hancock loves to say, oh, well, this has our DNA, or he used to say, he's changed some of his talking since he's been proven wrong, but he used to kind of the same. But he used to say that ancient North Eurasians who have R, right, the Malta is R, but he then says, oh, but these are closer to the Native Americans. Yeah, you know why? Because this is Q. Oh, that's why. That's why they're closer. Yeah, because R, even though it's a familial relation, whatever, genetically, it's not the same as because what it is P becomes, it goes K, or actually F before that. So F, and before that, of course, it's C. So C, F, and then after that, it becomes K, and then it becomes, from K becomes P, and then P becomes P1, and then P1 splits into Q and R. Oh, great. Anyways, and so ancient North Eurasians were P, Q, and R. So the parent, and then also the two other, siblings or whatever. So R does not really go over, and like I said to Graham Hancock people, if it did go over, it went straight into the center of the country, so it wasn't anything about going on boats, so it wouldn't have been his great maritime culture of the Arctic, like, okay, well, they went straight over to land. Oh, they did go to the Great Lakes, though, and then that's it. But they, anyways, so they weren't globe traveling. Anyways, so the one that's closer is this one, and I list what it is. It's Q1A1 F746. That's exactly what it is. And then it says here, and Tech one, the one in Montana burial, relates to that coming over. Anyways, and then the next picture is about how the Great Lakes region ice changes and becomes the Great Lakes.
Yeah, those are even this next series is
right.
even more important to get in your head and really drill in that.
Right. I want to go down to the cultures. I just want to real quick go through the pictures because I don't want to spend I want to spend more time on the culture, less time on this. So but just to show people, it slowly changes, and that it changes the environment. Just like I watched a video before about the Great Lakes, and one of the copper culture burials now is inland, but it used to be that I think it was Lake Michigan was like 30 feet higher, and so that was actually on high ground right next to the river. Anyways, I want to keep going.
That would be during the Nipissing high stand around 6,000 to 4,000 years ago.
Right.
Basically, what I was just going to say about those images was, as the glaciers are melting, you have different water fluctuations, and you have isostatic rebound because all the weight from the ice is disappearing. And so your environment is changing year after year before it becomes stabilized throughout the middle and late Archaic. So that's something to really consider when thinking about the copper people. Yeah, not just the copper trade and everything else. You have this shifting environment. Rivers are appearing and disappearing. Former shore lines are disappearing.
And then, so I had said to you that I felt like that these right here were the ones that were doing the copper or involved in the copper. And then you can read your comment.
You're right about the copper use. I want to correct some of these dates. Old copper and the red ochre people's dates are correct. There's room for error, but the other two are off. The red paint people are the Maritime Archaic. Dating for them is roughly 7,000 BCE. Dating for them is roughly 7,000 BCE to 1,200 BCE, with Maine and coastal New England's variant lasting from roughly 4,000/3,000 BCE to 1,800/1,200 BCE. Some new sites were recently discovered in Brunswick, so they maybe lasted until 1,200 BCE. Other groups, such as the Rosewater and Bay of Fuchs, used red ochre, but their toolkits are different, and they didn't hunt swordfish. A major diagnostic for the Maritime Archaic. With glacial chain, they come between 4,000 and 3,000 BCE, lasting until about 500 to 400 BCE. Many other sites have no data. That's important. They share many features with the Shellbound Archaic, which lasted from roughly 8,000/6,000 BCE to 1,500/1,000 BCE.
Right on.
When I put a dash there between the two ages, that's like my speculated reasoning on when that tradition truly got started.
Right.
Like for that area, like between those two dates. It's just a range of error.
Yeah, that's fine.
Because in those areas, whether it's the Great Lakes, the Maritime Archaic, or the Shellbound Archaic, you can see hints of that tradition getting started, and even some early sites that look like the tradition, but that aren't getting included in older literature.
Right.
It's obviously leaving a room of error.
And then this right here, the next picture, this shows how languages go back in America is 24,000 years ago, and not just the Clovis people that some people, try to act like, all archaeology still agrees with. No. And then this right here is the ancient North Eurasians and the genetic dispersals. I explain how and where and when they're moving around, how they get to Africa, what gets to the Americas. R doesn't get to the Americas, Q does. And then this is just another picture that says culturally, like I was saying before I said about people with Graham Hancock. Well, if you notice, there's all these different ones. Well, this red one is not the same as the purple or the ones that become the Eastern hunter-gatherers or the Iran. Although QDNA does show up in Eastern hunter-gatherers, does show up in the Western steppe herders, does show up in Iran. I don't think in the Neolithic, but does show up in Iran at some point because it also shows up in the Sumerians, at least in somewhere in that area. Anyways, so it is also more than even, like I said, more complex even than this picture is showing. But R is not getting over to the Americas. And even if, like I said, if it did, and you want to say it's in the last ice age, well, then it was all land. So that doesn't really help his thing about what the people are doing. And if you say that R, because he has a blog where someone he let post and he sort of agreed with that R was the one that was involved in the dispersal of his, Atlantis people, or, advanced culture. But if you look here, that this map, right, this is certainly from 24,000 until about 8,000. How many of these are in the water?
Yeah, that's it.
Right? I mean, they aren't. Okay.
No, they're all inland.
Yeah, inland. Even though the ones that so I'm just saying, and these are the major structures. I'm not saying that Q might have also gone along the Pacific coast as well as, but the first big shot did not do that.
Island hopping and coastal travel, that's very different from all the time existed.
Well, and R. So let's forget Q, because we know Q did some. R was landlocked. The white that goes to Iran is R2. The one that goes to the purple is R1B. The one that's this red is more R1A that goes to Eastern hunter-gatherers. Okay, this is, all of them are landlocked. So R is not going seafaring anywhere. Anyway, moving right along, because Graham Hancock is wrong, but this is another thing that breaks it down and shows too, it wasn't one people. So this whole thought that it's one great culture, no. Who? Because the people were sharing ideas. Even the ancient North Eurasians weren't somehow pure. They have East Asian influence and back and forth. And then M1 is the Malta-boy DNA, and it shows it's actually the relation to ancient North Eurasians is stronger in the Americas than really it is in Europe. And then the next picture, this has to do with relation to what's called the Devil's Gate Cave people, which is cDNA. So that's qDNA and rDNA. This is just cDNA. Everything on this is all about what cDNA is doing, in a sense, in relation to other cultures. And so this, the bottom map with the little dots, the darker the color, the brown or whatever, is the origin sort of hub, and then it disputes. So C is basically over near Korea and Russia and Japan, sort of over there, and then it becomes all over. Anyway, just as people know, and this is my idea too about the ideas moving to the Americas and also going to the Middle East and back. And this is a one that shows the X that we were talking about, X2B movements, and then X2A movements, and then, like I said, going to the Great Lakes, and then from there going to Canada, the Maritime,
Labrador,
right?
Labrador, and later Newfoundland.
Yeah, and then the next picture is showing the female DNA, because some people think that maybe it's not male that did stuff; it's female. Well, the female, this is A, B, C, D, and that other one had X. This shows where their hot spot at and where they went. And like I said, you can see A is way more in the Northwest, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the fact that A then takes over, even though it was already there a long time ago, makes me think it's possible a new version of A came and dominated the North. Anyway, just saying, it helps when you can see like what graves are and stuff. And the next one's about Q DNA.
Yeah, it's one of the versions I was talking about, like the classic white background with the orange shapes. Yeah.
Right. And that's my little red lines trying to help people grasp what's really going on. And then this is just a map that shows a version of what sort of Lake Baikal is in between. And then on the one side is Q and the other side is C, and how they both go over. This also kind of shows that with the DNA movements, shows out of both of them leaving Africa, because we're all from Africa, for those people that think that somehow some people came from somewhere else, and then how they just distributed. It also shows, because some people don't realize, C went down to South America, to Peru. It also went over the other way a little bit on northern South America, but it just shows that they go along the coast both times. And I showed a thing of you before, migrations. They can look at the migrations of religious ideas, and they can see how it relates to everything almost coming in from the Pacific Northwest. The dispersal patterns, really, which goes to what I show: multiple migrations, multiple ideas, all coming in. So this thought that, because some people think that everything is fixed in the Americas, like all the ideas are germinated in its own source. Well, heat mapping the ideas shows that that's not correct. Anyway, something I think is, because like I said, we're going to do mythology too, because that's also another thing that you got to, I believe we should study. That helps you understand.
You're more familiar with mythology, like regional and global, way more familiar than I am.
But you see how, just like the stone tools, it's one other thing to understand the big picture.
It's another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
A pretty big piece on top of that.
Right, it's like why people do things.
Yeah.
This, to me, is the mound stuff. This is my thoughts on the mound stuff in relation to like earth dival or no turtle. I think the first stuff goes down to the Middle East. No turtle from Siberia. No turtle, probably muskrat or whatever, going over to the Americas. No turtle. And mountains, a little pyramid thing, is actually to me a mountain and a mound. And then it changes, goes from the Middle East, which no mountains, goes back turtle and mounds. And there's actually more. I've simplified to make this easier to understand. There's more people this goes to, but it then goes all the way to me. This is X DNA doing this, goes all the way back to the Americas. Now it's just mounds and turtles. So I think turtles, and by the way, I have a map too, and I'm not going to do it right now, but I have a thing that shows turtle. We will do a whole video on that because I want to, about the turtles, showing that you can see as the X DNA is moving, everyone starts doing stuff with turtles, burying with turtles. Anyway, so, and then this right here is then the ideas from Siberia going back to the Americas at 7,000 to 6,000, and going back to, in a sense, the Middle East. First going to, Russia, and then down to the Cossack Mountains, and then down to Mesopotamia, and then down to Egypt. And then Egypt sending the ideas back to Mesopotamia, back to the steppe, back to Siberia, over to China, and back over to, but now it picks up the mountain again, back over to the Americas. So anyways.
Of course, with how often people like to talk about Egypt, like that last map, that's the main one they'll focus on.
They'll say, "Oh, Damien proved it, Egypt and everything." What? To teach you there's 4 fucking maps. Oh, anyways, yeah. So I have stuff that explains about that, the religious stuff. I'm not going to go into it. Because we actually said, take that back. We're going to go into it, just not this video. And so we'll do a thing on just that map, a video, one of these days.
A lot of your maps and a lot of your articles and videos, you're really focused on Lake Baikal.
Yes.
It's like this crossroads.
Absolutely.
Important hub. For me, with North America, or possibly even North, Central, and South America, Lake Baikal for you would be like the Great Lakes for me.
Oh,
because if you look throughout the archaic,
yes,
a lot of key ideas like learning how to work in copper, crude axes and all their variants. It's like they get started there, either there or like the general Midwest region,
right?
And then they really expand outward. And not just that, communities living at the edges of like that interaction networks, they're mimicking the items that the core is producing. Like,
right.
Say the core is making like a giant spear or dagger out of copper with a specific design. If you head out east, there's a good chance you'll find that exact same thing, but made out of stone.
Yeah, that's good. And we'll do a thing, another video one of these times on more about your maps and explain them, because I think there's a benefit to that. I agree. I have videos where I have just on Lake Baikal because I think it is absolutely that important.
It's way more important than most people think.
Yes. Well, and I think the Great Lakes, all even the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, there's all these different lakes or type of regions are way more important than people. They always think of oceans, but oceans are important. But lakes also were very, very important.
Yeah, and like we were talking about earlier with like all the stereotypes of how people view hunter-gatherers, and even today how people view Native Americans, because most of them were hunter-gatherers.
Yes.
For most of history and even prehistory. It's like when you look anywhere else in the world, whether it's like Northern Africa or China or Japan, and you see your stone axes, your metal tools, you think, people were civilized. They had, their centers have been amazing. There's order and stuff like that. You look over at the Great Lakes, you see the exact exact same thing. But it's with hunter-gatherers, and so with all these preconceptions in your head, you're thinking, they're simple.
Yeah.
You don't understand stuff. It's once you get rid of those preconceptions, those biases, and you just look at them like you would any other culture in the world.
I agree.
And look at them for the people that they were, and for the descendants that are still around today, for the people that they are. That whole conception that they're simple, that they have a hard time understanding simple topics, that they weren't smart enough to figure out smelting, it goes away. That's one of the mysteries of the Archaic and the Great Lakes region, and especially the Old Copper Complex, not just for me, but for so many other academics.
Well, one of the reasons too about when people say there's no smelting, they didn't have to smelt. If the copper is almost pure and you could hammer it, you didn't have to start with a lot of people that don't understand because they actually don't know about metalworking. I actually understand how to make jewelry, so I understand metalworking also. You could take an ore, right, which generally is a dirty source of that metal, and you remove the impurities by smelting and scraping the garbage off the top, and then you get a nugget, and then you can do something with it. Well, imagine if, like the Great Lakes, you have the nuggets. So so I'm just saying, I think it's absolutely asinine to say, well, they weren't intelligent enough to smelt. They didn't have to do that. So,
and even Larry Furrow, who's been working with copper, like hands-on, not just making replicas, but producing items for local indigenous communities. He's even done workshops at some universities in Minnesota and elsewhere around Lake Superior, showing people how to work with copper. And even for him, the idea that they weren't smart enough to smelt copper is just silly.
Yeah,
I think it is too. It's absurd. You have to think trial and error, working with metal, this pure 99% pure copper for thousands of years, using different types of wood, tamarack, white oak, things like that.
Why? I think also it's a misunderstanding of metals. Like they'll say, well, why doesn't people say cast things? I do cast metalling, or type of work, where some people, even now, when the modern era, that's not the only way we make jewelry. A lot of people do cold work today. People talk about not understanding jewelry working. I don't know what portion, but a good portion is not cast. They make, especially people that make it themselves, they twist it and bend it. They do the same stuff, the old copper hammers. They got hammers. I don't have any of that stuff and flatteners and stuff. I don't have that because I do forecast. But that's what I'm going to be making my own jewelry real soon. I already started carving the wax and stuff. I just had to move aside, financial stuff and different problems. But my point is, I'm not the only type of jeweler. So I'm just saying, so even now, people still, when we do know how, that's my point I was just trying to say, when they know how, the technology is there, and yet we still have people cold doing it, silver and copper, and sometimes even gold today.
And I bet, not to interrupt, but I bet if you looked across Europe or Afro-Eurasia, whether it's the Copper Age of Northwest Africa or the earliest Bronze Age in China or elsewhere, even going to the Iron Age in the medieval period, even with widespread smelting, different furnace types, different ways of smelting the metal and working with it, I bet there were still communities cold working the metal.
I bet there was.
And you look at their inventory of metal throughout time, you're going to find eras with smelted items alongside cold worked.
I agree with you, and probably even a blend where they do some melting and some still cold working. Yeah, I just made a comment that the thinking that cold working is it means that you don't know what you're doing. They still do cold working. Is that what you're going to say about the people now? I mean, it's just stupid.
Are we primitive, loincloth wearing cold work occasionally?
No, they call that artisan.
Or it's like the academic isn't coming to mind. It might have been Ryan Peterson. I think it was one of David Pompiani's episodes talking about the old copper complex and how we stereotypically view Native American and hunter-gatherer cultures. because it's like been so baked into the education system. You know, when we talk about the Greeks, we don't view them as like freaking goat herders.
Right.
That's not the main way we talk about them. Like, oh, those goat herders who occasionally made stone temples and who carved like marble, like beautiful marble statues. No, we don't talk about them like that. No, we talk about them like, you know, they're the Greeks. They did all these amazing things.
Exactly. That's a good
But
point.
when you get to the old copper complex, it's like David said, we're caught on the one hand between the pseudo-archaeologists who will like take that thread of copper work and carry it off to space aliens from the other galaxy. Teach you how to cold work a copper nugget. At the other end, the extremely conservative archaeologists who will say, well, we got these indigenous groups, they made metal, they worked with metal tools, and yeah. I'm trying to carefully walk that fine line between being too conservative and not accepting new ideas and being so open-minded my brain falls out. It's a very careful...
Well, I always tell people it's okay to go down rabbit holes, but don't eat the rabbit shit.
Yeah. Or it's like that magician who liked to debunk frauds.
James Randi.
Yeah, he's was it him? Yeah, I think it was him. He said it. Like, make sure you draw a line on the floor. Make sure it's clear. You know, it's okay. Now I'm paraphrasing here. He said it's okay to dabble in this other stuff. They're like this kooky, wacky stuff. You know, play around with the ideas. If you fully give yourself to those ideas and disregard everything else that's been firmly established, you know, you're going to be so far out there that you're like, I hate. And even like Bertrand Russell, another philosopher, he said something similar. Like, understand what you're researching. You know, make sure you know like what you're talking about, what's known. Like, just don't go off into these wacky areas like all the time. Don't spend all your time over there because, like, similar to what Randy said, you're going to get yourself lost.
Yeah, my thing is that we should let truth to be decided by the evidence. The evidence, when we make logical, reasonable jumps, they should be from the evidence, which is why, like you do and like I do in the different areas, you have to get the details.
Yeah, because Bertrand Russell, he said something like, never let yourself be diverted by what you wish to believe, but look only and solely at the facts and what those facts describe.
I agree.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the blog. So this next picture right here is just showing the shell mound grouping areas that they happen and the times that they happen. And the red areas are from 6,500 to 2,000 worldwide. And then, like you talked about, we talked about the Tlingit and the Haida and the different areas and how it relates. And if you notice, the Tlingit, the green goes all the way down to California. Those are also Athabascan related. So it shows. And Tlingit is part of Athabascan, and the ones in California also are, and they probably went down the coast. Anyways, and then the other pictures, that's the one on the far left. The one in the middle is showing the obsidian source, the stars, and then the triangle. See, it says 8,200-year-old shell mound, and then it shows a circle around that area in orange, and it shows that those all happened between 5,000, as I already talked about.
We've already talked about that region, shell mound.
Correct. This is just a rough draft showing you a picture. The other one is prehistoric cemeteries. The oldest prehistoric cemeteries in the region and which ones they are. I have stuff on all of this and a whole blog on it. But then the next one we're going to, addressing right here is the gouges, like you talked about.
Gouges are incredibly important. Arguably one of the most important tools used throughout the entire Archaic. Because here's what's interesting about the gouges. They're used throughout the early, middle, late Archaic. By the time the Poverty Point era ends, and we get transition into the Athena and Hopewell, the gouges are long gone. But they're rare when they were once common and widespread for thousands of years. So, it's not just the copper that's changing from utilitarian to ornament.
Right.
It's like this whole northern hunter-gathering tradition fades away when agriculture starts spreading further and further north. A completely different lifestyle almost.
Yeah. So we're not going to read all this. This is different stuff that relates to that. And we talked about how they could be used also to make totem poles or masks. And they did my map on what I think of the distribution of totem poles and how they migrated. And then we get to one of your maps on the woodworking gouges, the full gouges and the half gouges, and the short channel gouges and the intermediate gouges. I'm not going to read all that around. And then this just shows the dugout canoes and the ages, so people know like possible one of the uses for gouges would be the dugout canoes.
Just to add to that map, little snippet for Wisconsin and for Florida, those two dots, picture multiple canoes at those two dots.
Right, yeah.
Parking lots, pretty much.
Right, yeah.
For Florida, they've done a lot more work down there searching for canoes, and they've found dozens. That work is just starting up for Wisconsin. But I bet, based on all the gouges and woodworking tools, that we're going to find canoe parking lots up there, probably the same size, if not larger, than what we've found so far in Florida.
Yeah, I look forward to more archaeology, always finding stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Then this right here shows QDNA hotspot and its migration down to, or over to the Greenland, but also down to Brazil. And the one down in Brazil, when it shows up, immediately the first thing that practically happens is shell mounds. And in this migration I'm talking about, there's different migrations, as I already talked about, just so people don't get confused. This migration ends at 8,000, and that's the time of the shell mound.
Yeah,
Anyways.
that's also the same time we see a lot of red ochre starting to show up in burials down there, like between 13,000 and 8,000 years ago.
And then this map is just showing just a segment of different shell mounds from different areas, from Japan, from South America, Peru, Florida, Maine, also Florida, and southern Brazil, from California, and from Alabama, and Saudi Arabia, and from Australia, just showing different ones. Anyways, this is one of your maps that was showing shell mounds also.
Yeah, I'm probably going to end up making another, like a cleaner, crisper version of that, showing the whole of North America, or maybe even Central and South America too.
Oh, you should definitely do Central and South America.
People can say shell mounds and red ochre are linked together.
I agree.
The burial items, like from North America down to South America, the burial items are really similar.
You should absolutely do that. I agree.
Things like that.
You should absolutely do that. I agree. And this is a thing of Florida showing shell rings. Were also symbolic things, and the shell rings are also in Japan. So they're not just they're Florida and Georgia, South Carolina, Mississippi, and that these structures are not just trash either. They're also religious and dwelling buildings and stuff. And this is actually in Japan, showing they had mounds. Burial mounds, round ones, and this one right here is showing the multiple layers. So they bury different, like generations or whatever.
Yeah, we find the same thing in North America.
Right. I'm just trying to show that the ones in Americas are not that different. The ones coming from Asia.
No.
Then this right here once again shows different mounds, and it also shows shell mounds in relation to other dirt mounds, and then it shows the Hopewell culture and the Mississippian culture and where the mounds are related and the cultures. And this right here shows the Watson Break and the Poverty Point, and shows also mounds and other areas. And the ones down in the far left bottom, that is Earth Mound in Peru, where there's a volcano, and then they copy and make a pseudo volcano.
Kind of cool. I remember first seeing your drawing of that, and I was scratching my head, why would you mimic it just like that?
I don't know exactly, but I would say it's probably religious. But
yeah, it has something to do with the volcano, the fiery, the light.
Probably. I don't know if they saw it or they just knew what it was when they saw it. Maybe I don't really totally know how it relates. I do know there's mountain and fire and volcano mythology. So I would have to look more particular. But then this one here shows shell mounds in California, once again showing that a lot of times we see it. This actually is gone because they destroyed it. We see mounds that we think, oh, it's just a heap or something. Where this one is showing as a thing on top, and then I show one of the ones in, I think it's Kentucky or something, that I can't remember. I can see it. It's too small. But it's just showing that they're similar. It's a ramp, and with the elevated platform. It's a similar thing in California as it is out in the Midwest. Or
it's the same thing you find like that map in the top left, showing how they all cluster around San Francisco.
Yes.
That same density, we pretty much find that up here along coastal Maine. And same thing with California and up here in Maine. You dig in a shell mound. No, I'm not saying actually dig in one. I'm giving an example. If you were to dig in one, you would find a red ochre burial.
Yes.
Chance. Same thing in the Midwest, especially around Kentucky and Tennessee. And what research is showing, you head up to the Pacific Northwest, to those shell mounds, same thing. Red ochre burial. You head down to
Florida,
Atlantic coast, from Florida all the way up to the Carolinas, where all the shell rings are.
Right.
Same thing.
Right, and these are shell mounds in Florida, which, if you notice, most of them look like step mounds with a ramp, or almost like pyramids.
Yeah. They're not random. They're not just trash piles.
Right, exactly. And there's a whole bunch of stuff, symbolic connections. Then the next one's talking about the little bit of mythology, the Axis Mundi center of the world mentality. And I think it kind of relates to the Golden Mountains being the center of the steppe, which is really close to, in a sense, also Lake Baikal, which all this would have been going on anyways. People were at Lake Baikal 30,000 years ago, just so you know. And I'm showing this other thing on top in the left-hand corner is showing how the sun, why they call it the Golden Mountains, the sun, how it shines on the mountains makes it look kind of golden or whatever. And I think it's interesting that the pyramids in Egypt have a white structure, right? They paint it all white, their pyramid, and the top is golden. So I don't know, but I'm just showing an interesting to me connection. I wonder if it's like that the top being gold, because the top is the sun, and I think in Siberia they see this as like the god laying on the mountain or resting, kind of like the thought of Zeus.
Olympus having the gods.
Right. And in our mentality, an unanimistic mentality, we're like, well, where's the God? And they're going, right there. Don't you see the God laying on the mountain?
Like even the Hopi tribe in the Southwest, they have a similar belief with their spirits called Kachinas. Some of their oral traditions say they came from this place called San Francisco Mountain. It's not near San Francisco, which is named that. But
right.
It's an actual mountain. And so that's kind of similar to like your gods, your powerful spirits or whatever, coming from a mountain or ruling from a mountaintop or having their meetings there.
Right. And then this left-hand picture looks like a flying, dragon. It's actually one of the clouds being hit by the sun in the high atmosphere of the Altai. And it looks like it's a, rainbow cloud or something out of nowhere or something. But it's just the way the sun hits the cloud and the cold air and high altitude. Anyways, they also have these rock structures that kind of look like rock people on the Altai Mountains. Anyways, then I show how it relates to, I think, the idea of, the Norse mythology of the tree and the mountain holding up the world, and also the sun coming out between the mountain in Egypt. And then that little mound next to the Egyptian goddesses pouring the water around the thing. That mound, there's a tree growing right out of it. This is I think it's Denmark. It's an actual burial mound with the tree growing on it. Like someone planted the tree in the burial mound. And
even over here in North America, a lot of the old sketches and like the lithographs from the 1800s, they show mounds like that.
Yeah.
The old mound, and you have a bunch of trees growing out of it.
Right, and we see that as the tree destroying the mound, but it's possible that they made it that way. Yeah. Or once the thing was ended, the burial's over, then planting a tree on it is seen as being a religious thing, which is interesting too, because right next to this, right, I call it Olos or something, or I can't remember. This they build a rock structure and then they put a stick or several sticks, on it, like this one's like a teepee, but it can just be one stick or several sticks, generally in the center. And it relates to the same concept. They build these in mountains and Mongolia and stuff. And then they or Siberia, and they put these blue ribbons, meaning the sky and blue in heaven, because the god is the great sky or the blue sky, which I always say, yeah, you mean the day sky? You mean the not storm god's side?
Yeah.
So, and then this one has a wolf head because wolves are related to the clan stuff. There's a lot of like the clan of the wolf or whatever. Anyways, but it just shows that they're making small little rock mountains atop of the mountain, and then they put a tree in the middle or whatever. So I think that's interesting, and that goes with even the Mississippian culture, the mound culture mentality of the world is also the mound with the tree, and that's the Axis Mundi, and the Hopewell also believe the Axis Mundi, and then, so to me, I'm trying to show is all this mythology is relating to what's happening culturally. This is my thing showing, because people are like, oh, the pyramids or whatever. So I try to break it down and show like this one picture that shows the different pyramids. The reason to me, I already said it, I think it has to do with all the stuff, the mounds are really about mounds and mountain mythology. So a lot of it relates to the earth diver or versions of that. So that explains the mounds. Someone said before about these three, or more, but generally there's a lot that have three things. Well, the sun is considered to be three, right? And so is the moon. Often, in a sense, like the birth, the child, right? The mother and the crone or whatever. It's this, or the child, the father and the grandfather. It's religious related. So in other words, what I especially mean is people that think, oh, that means there had to be a world-spanning culture. I already explained it to you. It's religion. Religion did span the culture. Religion jumped genetics. There's religion ideas that are shared that the genetics do not share. So it's not true that one genetics of any kind, anything, went absolutely everywhere. No genetics did this, but ideas did. So the reason there's a connection, sort of, to me, of all these things, of shell mounds, kurgans, dolmens, and other sorts of mounds and pyramids and ziggurats, all this, it's not because someone taught. If you notice, they really are not that similar in a sense. They're not exactly. They're all different forms, but they're doing a similar symbology.
Oh, it's not I think that's one of the important things that your maps show. It's not like the really strict hyper-diffusionism
No.
that Graham Baycock and his followers talk about, but it's not a complete independent invention either.
Correct.
It's like this fusion of migration, idea exchange over hundreds of years, and adapting to local environments.
I totally agree.
But you can still see the common thread, whether it's with the mounds, or the pyramids, or kurgans, or dolmens, even with the shell mounds, you can see like that thread.
Yeah.
That goes way back.
That's what I'm trying to explain. And then I also showed, too, in this map, that it's a cosmology. It's a belief about the world, is what, in a sense, like cosmology is like how the world's formed or whatever. It's not that they're not all the same, right? They're all a little bit different. They're all flat Earths. That's similar. And they all of them have some sort of a hill or a mountain or some kind of a concept of something raised up, but it's not all the same. Like the Navajo, it's almost more directional than it is any sort of a mound. And the Incas is very small mound. Everybody else has sort of something that's big. The Hebrew, the mountains are pretty small, even though they're supposedly holding up the sky. Certainly they're smaller than the Sumerian, who thought the mountains were freaking humongous. And the Egyptians, who thought the mountains were so high that they had snow on them. I mean, so there definitely is, but it's a general theme. It's a myth theme, what they call it. I can see.
One of these videos, we're going to have to talk about Poverty Point, because there's a group of artwork out west and a bunch of motifs for how they made their characters.
Yeah.
Well, when I was doing research on Poverty Point and who they were interacting with, where they were getting their copper from, I was looking at a lot of their artifacts, and especially Poverty Point's structure.
Yes.
These concentric arches and like this, what they're thinking is like a bird head or some bird effigy at the top of that. Well, when I was looking at their artifacts and their structure and comparing it, and looking at the trade routes and just comparing it with stuff around the eastern woodlands and even further out west in the desert, there is a surprising similarity between some of their artifacts, especially the red owls and like the arches with the owls, or like the bird head with artwork out west. Nobody's talked about that.
Yeah.
People study Poverty Point. And we know some of that artwork was being produced at that time.
Yeah, owls. I know owls are a big deal because they're definitely a religious symbol, especially in Europe.
And some academics have talked about its Poverty Point was kind of like a brand new social structure that brought tribes near and far together. And I kind of think that, like, their worldview, like if you could take their worldview and put it on like a diagram, like what we just looked at with each of those, like the trees or the world surrounded by water, I think they were trying to do something like that with Poverty Point structure, with like the nested crescents, because we see crescents used throughout the entire Archaic period, with the top mound, like bird mound, and its relation to the owls. And I think they're including their cosmology at that site.
Yeah.
So that's something we should get into.
Yeah, no, I definitely think so. And well, we're going to get into, like I said, when we do the archaeology things, we'll do something like that. And then we're going to do mythology. We're going to, learn about specific mythologies where where the main focus archaeology is on the, in other words, we're going to do one where it's archaeology main and maybe talk a little bit about religion. The other is going to be the exact opposite, mainly religion with a little bit about the archaeology.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that would be a learning experience for me because you can bring me up to speed on mythologies, different oral traditions.
Yeah, you really have to. It's a lot, just like we've already done before. There is a lot. I'm working on a thing right now. I've already been working on it for 2 weeks about flood myths and stuff. But it's also because there's someone who had from Russia has done research on mythology. In fact, the one about the Americas coming in and all that, that's his stuff. Work, and most of his work is in Russian, and he's worked on mythology, I think 30 years or something. I mean, like you and me go crazy in that. That's what he's been doing, and he's an academic. He wrote a thing saying that he believes that the mythology of emergence from the underworld, which is beyond just that, but emergence from the underworld, he thinks is the oldest, like maybe 60,000 years old, and from Africa. I really doubt that. I find that to be inaccurate to my global understanding. I understand he does miss, but I've been doing so much archaeology and so much movements of people, and also doing the anthropology of what hunter-gatherers, how they think, not the beliefs, but what they sort of think. So just give you a really quick understanding from what this is anthropology in a sense that hunter-gatherers would say during the day. Because they both tell stories in the day and at night. And the stories in the day are basically about day things that they do, maybe hunting or whatever. The stories at night are about the afterlife, about ancestors, about religious, spiritual things, which would make sense because certainly there's Milky Way to the afterlife. We know that the Pleiades is got to be probably 40,000 years old at least. And I don't know if you know, but the cosmic hunt where the stars or the Big Dipper or whatever becomes an animal in the sky because they kill it in a sense. And there's also the moon, worship of the moon is at least 40,000 years old, or watching of it, because they have little crescents and the shapes and stuff. They can tell that it's a moon calendar. There's a lot of, plus and ethnographically, like I said, ethnographically, they say this, that during the night, that's when they make all these stories around the fire or whatever. That's the time of, and also to me, he says that's one of the oldest things. I think one of the oldest things, which is the most universal of all myths. It's almost not a culture in the world that doesn't have this sort of mythology, that the primordial state of the universe was darkness, vastness, emptiness, and water. So not giving any other mythology, just that. But then if you put that with ethnographic studies, where the ethnographic people are, in other words, cultures you're asking that you can talk to, they're saying the night stories, like, the vastness, the emptiness, nighttime, and then it looks like they're floating in water because they're moving around and whatever up there. The fact that that's the universal, and then, like I said, the Earth divers thing is an after that. It's not the oldest. So I don't think emergence is either, because the emergence of people from the underworld is after there's already land. Well, then that's not an origin story. It's an origin of human story, which I know I talked about this last time. Even if he's correct, it comes from Africa, okay, and it's the thing. I still have a problem with it, because even the cultures that say that they come from emergence from the underworld still agree that the world started in water and darkness. So the original myth they are all telling me is the nighttime, which matches what they say. And then that would be why there's the cosmic hunt is about night. That would be why the moon before the sun matters. That would be why the ancestors go up into heaven and they take the Milky Way. Well, yeah, nighttime. I mean, it's nighttime. It starts making more sense. And the Earth diver, if you think about it in how they explain it, they're really talking about the primordial ocean, because it sounds like flood world, but that's not really what they're saying. They're really saying there was no world, and then where the world came from is out of this darkness, this nothingness, which matches what the Sumerians say. It's the mother water, which we'll do a thing that's explain that. And that's the same, the waters of Nu for the Egyptians. They say that the waters of Nu, right? Because this is what some people say. Oh, well, it has to do with the Nile. And I'm like, that's the waters of Nu, the Nile? Well, no, the waters of Nu are the cosmic ocean. Oh, so it's not really about the Nile. Yes, maybe eventually they're relating it to that. Like you said, your cultural area, you go, oh yeah, must be the waters. Even like they think in the Amazon, they go, oh, the snake came down and made the Amazon River. But they don't say the Amazon River is the primordial ocean. You see what I'm saying? You get what I'm trying to say? So I feel like the layer before, I know it's not as cool for them because there's not a lot of mythology to just say nothingness. But that nothingness, the fact that every culture does that, and all the cultures say it's water, means that somehow, because also I don't think it had to be a big mythology, because if you go down to the Hazai, they don't have a real big mythology. They basically, it's pretty simple. So to me, I don't think that when the people left Africa, it had to have been lots of long-winded stories. You know what I'm saying? I don't think it's, so I think that all these like really developed later, or is what they're all to me, later developed stories. I don't, because like that guy Craigenford, which we'll talk about him and even show a little video of what he says one of these times, because I'm addressing him in my blog. My blog is going to be called "He's Wrong." It's going to say he's in error, but because and one of the things I'm trying to show is that I think that the other guy is in error, because he's making, I think, his emergence from the underworld relating to things that aren't really emergence from the underworld. Like he says it's from a tree. Well, isn't a tree the above world, not the underworld? If people come from a tree, how is that related? People come from grass. How is grass related to the underworld? I just, or he says, even if you could agree to that, he says, well, people come from a rock. Well, how is a rock part of the underworld? If a rock is above ground and then they come from that, how is that? Are we just saying anything comes from, out of something? Then how is the Earth diver then not the exact same story? It's coming from the underworld, is it not? Or I mean, just because the underworld they're talking about is not death. It's a primordial state of existence. Yeah. Which is, to me, sounds exactly like, oh, you mean the primordial state of existence? Like in, I think it's a Navajo or Hopi tradition, where the primordial state, once again, is water and nothingness. The first world was water. And yeah, the first mythology, I think, was nothingness. It was just that, the night sky. Anyways, my point is that's something I'm trying to do. So we will do stuff on that. But let's go back real quick. The old copper culture and your art of it, because I want to. Yeah, I want to. Yeah, your maps. I want to address some of that stuff. These are our copper things found, correct?
Yes, these are. This one right here, it's an older map I made showing the distribution of a diagnostic old copper complex item called IA triangulates. And these are well known in the collector communities, and they're one of the most well known copper items for anyone looking at the old copper complex for the first time.
All right. So then we go to the next one. This shows the arcade period copper culture distribution from an article I looked at. And here's another one that
one is too small.
Yes, I'm just showing the
it's good to show people like how many different versions there are of these maps.
Right. Yeah, I'm not saying that these maps are the authoritative. I'm just showing that these are maps that people can find, whatever. So this also shows distribution, and this one also is another one I found that shows some distribution. And then here's your culture. I like how you did it, but this is more the kind of stuff I like because you broke it up into cultural areas.
Yeah, because if you look at each of those areas, you find copper tools, especially the IA triangulates. A lot of them look standardized, so that tells you that they have value for standardization and reliable tools. But more than that, each of these areas, the people living there, they have different subsistence strategies, and they're consuming different mammals and fish in different amounts. Like with Oxbow, it seems like their main food item are bison. They're setting up their bison kill runs, chasing after hundreds of bison and letting them jump off cliffs. They're doing all of that. They're mobile. They're living in tents. I think they have some pit house usage, but that comes later on, and their pit houses are small. With the Shield Arcade, it's pretty similar to what you get with Michigan and Wisconsin, and also the Laurentian. Though it's more in the boreal forest, so it's colder. But they're really going after trout, lake sturgeon, like pike, fish like that. But they're going after elk, moose, caribou that are living up there. And what's interesting is some of their items, way back when, decades ago, when it was thought all these different groups were isolated, we were looking at some of the rocks and the flakes that these Shield Arcade groups were using, especially around Lake Nipigon, the oval lake north of Lake Superior.
Right.
And they thought it was a type of shirt called a Hudson Bay lowland shirt. Well, come to find out, that's not what it is. It's a pretty much identical looking type of shirt that's mined in North Dakota and South Dakota.
No.
So right there, that shows even way back when these people are trading and moving around enough to get a shirt, a type of flip like that. Down in the yellow region, the southern Riverine Copper Complex, that's pretty much Shellbound Archaic territory, especially towards the south. Way at the southern tip, copper is rare. It's pretty much considered an exotic item for those people. It starts getting more common when you head into central and northern Illinois and Indiana and Ohio. That's where you start finding your spearheads, your copper knives, your awls, and even some woodworking tools. Over in Laurentian Copper Complex territory, all those stone gouges that we've been talking about, I showed some earlier, like these.
Right.
I made this after looking at the Emerson gouge, the one that was unfortunately stolen. And no, this isn't the real one because it's made of clay. The real one hasn't been found. According to Bruce Bork, he was an archaeologist up here, really important for excavating and documenting a lot of materials from the maritime archaic sites along the coast. And he's written about the Laurentians and the old copper complex too a little bit. And one of the museums around here was doing some remodeling, moving some items around, and a bunch went missing. They wound up way in the Midwest at an artifacts show, getting being sold at auction.
Wow.
They were able to get a lot of them back, but unfortunately, the Emerson gouge still missing after all these decades.
I think that's rotten that people take things and then keep them, or even if they find them and keep them. I think a lot of that stuff should go to museums.
Yeah, that way people can put it into databases and like get it into a GIS database for the public to look at. So that way they can understand how extensive, not just how extensive, but like David said with the old copper complex, which I agree with, the scale. Like how many items were these people producing when they flourished? Besides the gouges, can you bring up the map again? Okay, with the Laurentian, this is a really interesting thing because it frames the archaic as not just a different interaction, not just different communities interacting before agriculture becomes intensive and widespread, but it really shows an entirely different way of life throughout the archaic, because with just focusing on the copper is getting sent out east into the Laurentian territory, and they are mimicking copper designs in their stone tools. That suggests to me and a lot of others that even others who aren't tackling this culture from this GIS multi-layered perspective, it's suggesting to them that there is social value to copper, way beyond purely utilitarian.
I agree.
And you head up over into Oxford territory, and you kind of find a similar thing. Some, not a lot, but some copper items have been found that look practically identical to their Neolithic points. So then again, there's value beyond purely utilitarian for the copper usage.
Yeah, I don't think it's purely utilitarian.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think there is a social and prestige value.
Oh, yeah.
Especially with the highly standardized, well-made items that you find that cluster only around Lake Superior. That's very telling to me that there's something else going on there that's been overlooked. And I have that highlighted in this map. I'm calling it, at least for right now, the Northern Barian Interaction Zone. And I have some of those items in the lower left, just to give an example.
Right.
Very well made. What you'll notice here is copper is mainly getting exchanged to the north, to the east, and to the northwest. It's barely getting brought down south. And even in the riverine copper complex zone, it's rare down there. That's completely different than what you see with the later Hopewell, where copper is widespread, even making it all the way out to the Rocky Mountains and even further to the Pacific Northwest.
But also, isn't the copper not as largely distributed as in this type of areas? Like, isn't it just more up to the south and east and west, but not so much north? The exact opposite?
It's still getting north, but the scale has decreased. And not just that, the variety of items is decreased by a lot. Like all the complex socketed spearheads, the thick heavy axes, the giant woodworking axes with rolled sockets and even angular ones, all that stuff goes away. What you get instead is a lot more emphasis on making artwork, like non-functional, like hang up on your wall type artwork.
I have a question too. Did they keep the woodworking tradition, just switch it to stone and use copper for a different thing, or did they just get rid of the woodworking traditions in a large way? You know what I'm saying? Like, in other words, if they're building all these for boats or totem poles or whatever they're doing, and then all of a sudden they switch copper and say, okay, we're going to use copper for something else. Did they fill that gap with stone, or did they just lose the gap altogether?
No, the woodworking tradition is still there. They're still using beaver incisor knives, like organic one. They're still using stone. And one of the items they've kept.
Beaver teeth is actually what they carved the face, I think, or some part of that totem pole in Siberia.
Yeah, and beaver teeth are very widespread, but they're one of the items that Laurentians and maritime archaics are known for using a lot of.
That is interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so that's another item, an organic one, that's helping them work with. Heading back towards the Midwest, throughout the middle, late archaic to the terminal archaic, we see a shift with the shell mound archaic and their dog burials. These spread further north throughout the middle and late archaic. Once it transitions to the early woodwind period, after 3,000 years ago, after the end of the Arctic Fight, old copper complex is pretty much gone. What you get instead, you get a bunch of red ochre burials, a bunch of shell usage in Wisconsin and surrounding areas. All copper items, like giant copper spearheads, those become tiny. And the ones that have been found look like they're getting resharpened to the point where they become useless. But you'll have something like this, like a brand new one. Those ones during red ochre times, they're like really strong devils and like really awkward angles. Like they've used these things for decades, handed them down until they couldn't use them anymore. Because like for the woodworking tradition, they're keeping axes. The thing is, their axes are getting noticeably smaller and thinner, and they're getting more stylized. With the edges are getting squared. Like this is a spot from the archaic. This is a spot from the archaic. Rolled socket, curved blade. That way you can hollow out your wooden troughs if you're boiling something, or your bowls, or your, what we actually have evidence for, the dugout canoes. When you get into the woodland period, these are gone. What you have instead, you just have your axe. And even then, towards Mississippian times, they're getting so thin that they border on useless. You hit a tree with one of those things and it's going to fold.
So do you think that they were making them that way, or do you think that they were just grinding them that way? In other words, what I mean is, like, at some point, did it become just a transmitted so thin it's not useful because it's just ceremonial? Because I know there's also clubs that are real clubs that are probably used, but at a certain point, clubs just become something a ruler or whatever holds, and it's more ceremonial. It's not even sometimes even useful. Is it, or you know what I'm saying? Or do you think it could be both?
No, it's both. Because even throughout the woodland, when we see this huge emphasis on exotic items being imported in certain ritual centers, like the earthworks in Ohio, you're still finding axes that kind of look archaic in thickness and styles. Some of them do show wear use along the blade, but you have also this other type of axe, super thin, either super thin or super thin and extraordinarily large, like super large, but incredibly thin. This picks up towards the Mississippian era. You get less heavy-duty actual woodworking axes into more ceremonial ones, like they're almost like they're honoring the lineages or something like that can trace back to hey, we used to be part of this big woodworking group, really influential way back when.
Right.
But you get this growing emphasis on ceremonialism and monumental earthwork construction that you don't really see in the Midwest throughout the archaic. Like all that energy is getting put to the woodworking tradition, the copper working, and presumably the boat working and navigating the waterways.
All right, that sounds good. We're gonna be stopping pretty soon. We've covered a lot. I wish we could have covered more. I mean, and like I said, this is not going to be our last video, anyways.
No, we're going to say a lot more about.
We're going to say a lot more about all of the stuff, right? So, like I told you, we're going to be a team, so we're going to be having multiple videos. So there's no rush to try to get every word in. I was always trying to say is yes. We're going to do, and we'll probably make another video later on, like I said, your maps and the copper culture, and probably do this will be number 1 maybe, and do another number 2, not the next video, but maybe with 3 or 4 videos, we'll do a number 2. And because I think it's super important what we talked about the hunter-gatherer stuff and some of the other stuff to tie it in. I think it's too important not to tell it. But I do like so much about this stuff. We're going to probably do a second copper culture video and then start here and go down and finish till, the Mississippian and all that, that information, also added, because I'm going to add this to the blog and then I will add that to the blog later.
Yeah, I think that's going to be important for us to do, because there's still a lot of academics that have a hard time conceptualizing that even Siberians could have traded obsidian into Alaska.
Right.
And so when we do these episodes and talk about the old copper complex and all the other cultures in the Americas back then, I think it'll help people understand, hey, even way back when, thousands of years ago, the Americas weren't isolated.
Oh no.
People were moving around. Quite a lot, just like what you'd expect with any other hunting and gathering society in Eurasia or wherever, Africa, Europe, or the Mesolithic, you name it.
I agree.
It's going to help people understand the Americas, and for me, this northern hunting and gathering tradition, especially the old copper complex, it's going to help them put that global framework.
I agree.
Easier to understand instead of being this weird mystery that people have a hard time talking about.
I agree. And it's like we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna do it again. And so go ahead and tell people where they can find you and anything else that you wanted to say.
Okay, yeah. The main place where people can find me right now is on X. I go by CopperViolette. I have an academia.edu account, but on there I go by Dylan Violette. There is more than one Dylan Violette on academia.edu. Look for the profile icon with black background, copper-colored geometric shapes, and blue squiggly lines. That one's me. Click on it, you'll find my maps. You'll find my maps, at least the ones I posted so far. I have a bunch of the words. You'll find my stuff, and you'll also find the articles that Damien and I have done together. I'm also on Reddit. On there, I go by CopperViolette. The main group I'm interacting with on there right now is the Ancient Americas group. It's a fan page dedicated to that guy's YouTube channel. I post there every now and then, especially if I'm doing a series of articles or I want to get people thinking about a certain type of tool. I post on there every now and then. But if you want to reach out to me personally, go with Facebook. Dylan Violette on there. Profile picture is of me. I'm holding my dog. He's a puppy back then. He's grown now, over 2 years old. On there, I post a lot to different Native American groups. I answer questions that people ask. I've been posting some of my research in different articles that I find interesting to the old copper complex and ancient waterways America Facebook group. The admin on there is Robin Miller. I've also been posting to another group called Misquabic. That one is run by Larry Furrow. Misquabic, for those who don't know, is Oathblade for copper or red metal. That group is smaller than the other Facebook group I just mentioned, but I've also been posting and sharing stuff there too. So that's where you can find me right now. If I get anything else started, I will mention it.
Yes, and also I will be attaching to every time that you and me talk. I'm going to attach the blog that has that I made about you, us chatting, and then every time I will always update it with the video we do together. I will put it in there, so then you'll have a catalog of all the stuff, and that has all your links also, so people could go to click on that, which will be in the description for this video. And like I said, all the videos we do together, I'm going to put that blog so that you always have a source that people can go to. So I really appreciate you taking your time and doing this with me. And I had a fun time, and I hope you did as well.
It's fun talking about these different topics and integrating them into something I've been researching for a little while. So that helps out.
Great. All right. Well, everyone, take care.
Yep. See you next time.
Hello, and welcome to my channel. I am Damien Marie AtHope. In the simplest terms, I am an atheist-humanist philosopher and prehistorical writer-researcher at DamienMarieAtHope.com. I am specifically an axiological atheist. An axiological atheism can be thought to involve ethical and value theory reasoned and moral argument driven apatheism, ignosticism, atheism, anti-theism, anti-religionism, secularism, and humanism. Axiological atheists can be understood as a value theory or a value science atheist. As an axiological atheism's ethically reasoned and constructive pro-humanity. I am an axiological thinker, value theorist. The science of goodness, worthiness, usefulness, valuableness, virtue, reliableness, accuracy, validity, morality, integrity, beneficialness, etc., etc. We axiologists have a value consciousness. And in general, we see the architecture of humanistic humanitarianism value in people that we see as dignity beings. Places and things are not. Axiology is a value theory. In its broadest sense, it involves areas of philosophy that are deemed to encompass some evaluative or evaluation aspect. Therefore, it crosses almost all domains in some way or another. Now for a more detailed terms as to what I am. I am an axiological atheist, an anti-theist, an anti-religionist, secularist, humanist, rationalist, writer, artist, poet, philosopher, advocate, activist with schooling in psychology, sociology, as well as I am an autodidact, self-taught in science, archaeology, anthropology, and philosophy. I promote science and am against pseudoscience, pseudohistory, pseudomorality, things that are found in religion.